back in front. He's chugging to second. He'll stand with a bases-clearing double.
Nolan, to be able to drive into there was big, man. He needed that. We needed that, and hopefully it sparks more. But his at-bats are looking a lot better as well. It's line drives. He's using the middle of the field, and he looks under control right now.
Who's this guy? Where'd he come from? That's what it sounded like last night on Bally Sports Midwest. We opened today with Nolan Arenado, who the Cardinals really need to get going. And all right, Nolan, an extra base hit with a runner in scoring position, something he had only done once since July 5th. That's going to start perking up my eyes. And then suddenly, I saw earlier today on Twitter, Eno Saris put something out that was very interesting, T-Bone. Said, quote, hasn't shown up in the splits yet, but Nolan Arenado is doing something a little differently recently. Only 2 qualified hitters have increased their bat speed more in the last month compared to their first couple of months of the season than Arenado. Now, swinging harder does not always mean better results, right? It typically does, but it does not always mean that. But for Nolan Arenado, it has. If you look at his last 14 games, he has a hit in 13 of them. He currently is riding a hitting streak of, I think it's 10 games right now. 9 games, a 9-game hitting streak currently. In that stretch, he's batting .341 with an OPS of right around 800. And that 800 number is important because if you go back to what he did in that Washington Nationals series, which is the last 28 games for him, he's batting .302 and has an OPS of 805. Now, that is not prime Nolan Arenado. His slugging percentage is still only, quote-unquote, .450. That is a hell of a lot better, though, than the player that we have seen for the vast majority of this season. Basically, since the 4th of July, he looks different. Not perfect, but different. T-Bone, I was listening to the morning show earlier today, and Randy Carricker said something that caught my ears. I want to take a listen to this and get your reaction to it.
I'm going to say if the Cardinals make the playoffs, it's because Nolan Arenado got hot and carried him for 2 weeks. He's capable of doing it. He's done it in the past. And really, the only way they're going to have oomph in their offense is with him. They're really people like Burleson hitting well, Wynn hitting well, Donovan. Not great, but okay. But they don't have a guy to carry the team. And Nolan Arenado is capable. I think if this team is going to win, even now, even though we haven't seen it this year, if they're going to, it's going to be because Nolan Arenado carried him for a couple of weeks.
T-Bone is looking better. Do you agree with Randy Carricker? He's the guy that has to get going for this team to get back on track.
I don't think he has to be the guy that gets going for them to get to the playoffs. I think there are a couple of guys, and he happens to fall into that. And I honestly don't think he's going to be that guy. I'm still very skeptical on Nolan Arenado. The whole bat speed thing, that's great. As we know, the harder you swing, the better chances you hit the ball harder. I'm still skeptical on Nolan Arenado, especially because, like, even dating back to the All-Star break, .433 slug, the numbers look better, but he's just not hitting for a ton of power still. And until he does that, he's not going to be able to be the guy that ends up going on that stretch that Randy's talking about. I think it is more likely that the guy that we end up talking about that gets hot, that pushes the Cardinals to the playoffs, is someone not named Nolan Arenado. I think it's probably a Contreras or even maybe a Nolan Gorman. I just don't think Nolan Arenado is going to be that guy. I'm too skeptical of the lack of power still. Look, he's hitting for a decent average, and you will take that, especially if there's runners in scoring position. You will take the occasional single from Nolan Arenado. I'm not buying, though, that what we are seeing from Nolan Arenado, though it is better, I don't think it's going to get to that level of, hey, this guy can carry the offense for 2 weeks. I just don't think he has that in him at this point in his career.
I think there's a pretty simple explanation to this. BK, you brought it up yesterday, the poor numbers for Nolan Arenado with runners in scoring position, his extra bases. I think you just BKO'd his slump.
Wow. Hey, man.
A reverse BKO. We did it. So, we found a way to get it back on track.
It for a good purpose.
Maybe you should be negative more often about the Cardinals.
Maybe that's actually what's gone wrong for them, is I've been a little too optimistic about them this season. I apologize for that. Somebody from the text line in 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show. YouTube off and running today. The chat going, youtube.com/101ESPN-STL. The 941 says his big hit, guys, was the chopper over a drawn-in infield. Still out on Nolan Arenado. That's not the hit that's going to get me back in. Totally fair. I'm not telling you've got to be all the way in on Nolan Arenado. What I am saying is that it's been better. And right now, beggars can't be choosers. And Nolan Arenado on the season has been flat out bad. Not relative to his expectations, but relative to, like, Nolan Gorman's preseason expectations, or relative to what we were hoping for Alec Burleson or Wilson Contreras, like a future Hall of Famer, this is a bad season. A pretty good player, this is still below expectations for them this year. But he's been better, and it is starting to make me wonder, like, can he do it? Can he be somebody that for a month doesn't go on a scorcher, but is somebody that you feel comfortable batting in the 4 or 5 spot in your lineup? Dude, that is a big problem for the Cardinals right now. Try filling out a lineup. Go ahead, whether it's a lefty on the mound or a righty on the mound. Go ahead and fill out a lineup and tell me how far you get before you're like, not feeling good about this spot in my order. I bet you it's number 4. I bet you it's the cleanup spot in your roster. And you know who typically would be able to fill that role for you? This dude. Nolan Arenado is supposed to be the cleanup hitter on this team. And that doesn't matter if it's a righty on the mound or a lefty on the mound or somebody that throws with both hands. I don't think that happens right now in Major League Baseball, but if it did for whatever reason, Arenado's the dude you want on the mound or one at the plate for that guy. I'm still very skeptical.
That whole big speech right there?
I would love for it to happen because I do agree with Randy. I think you need another right-handed bat to emerge, and I have no confidence that guy is going to be Paul Goldschmidt. I think right now the right-handed bat that you trust is Wilson Contreras, despite the fact that he had gone cold for a couple of weeks. I think he's fine. He's going to be all right. Tommy Pham I really like, but he's a supplementary piece. He's like a 6-hole hitter, a 7-hole hitter. That's what he should be, where he should be hitting on a contending team. Arenado's the one guy you can really point to and say, if they're going to get this thing fixed, especially against lefties, but really on both sides, he's the one that has to do it. So I agree with Randy that if they make the playoffs, he probably did have a big month. I just am struggling to find a way where that happens for him, man. I think this is kind of the peak. Like an 800 OPS is kind of the peak, and I think they need more than that. I know it's unfortunate to ask for even more than what they've been getting, but I think they need it. So I'm still highly skeptical of it, but the guy that I'm even more skeptical of is Paul Goldschmidt, who got the night off last night, didn't play against Taj Bradley. I thought it was a smart move by Ollie Marmol to not have him in the lineup. Brad Thompson was also on the morning show earlier today. Here's what he had to say about the Cardinals playing the matchups with Paul Goldschmidt, not having him in the lineup tonight, and if that could be a trend moving forward.
You had the combination of he dominates righties, and Goldie had been struggling mightily. I believe he was like 0 for his last 18 coming into that ball game, 7 strikeouts during that time. So you had to kind of make that pivot. I still think that Goldie's going to be in there more often than not. But if he continues to struggle and you have other guys that can step up in his stead, I could see a little bit more of Alec Burleson over at first base if the matchup is there. But boy, that's not a great recipe for success, is it? I mean, for this ball club, you need him to be doing it. You need Arenado to be doing it. But I think it was a perfect storm yesterday.
I think you need Arenado. I don't think this team any longer needs Paul Goldschmidt. I think they have his replacement, especially against right-handed pitching. I think you saw it yesterday. I think this team can still make the playoffs even if Paul Goldschmidt is going to be a platoon player, and I think that's what he is. This year, he's batting .210 against right-handed pitchers. He's got an OPS plus of 25% below league average offensively against righties. Against lefties, he's actually 20% above league average. 280 hitter, slugging 420. It's not great, but it's fine. You can get away with that. Against left-handed pitching, he can help you there. But they need somebody to replace him against righties, and the guy to do that is Alec Burleson, who's 45% above league average offensively against right-handed pitching. The other thing that allows you to do is get even more of those lefty bats into the lineup, whether that's Gorman or Matt Carpenter or having Tommy Pham become an everyday player against righties. These are things that allow for more flexibility with Burleson at first base. I also think it helps you get your best defensive alignment out there in the outfield. You go down a little bit from Paul Goldschmidt certainly to Alec Burleson at first, but that's less valuable than the defense that you have in the outfield. I think this is the way that they should be operating, especially against certain styles of right-handed pitchers. Guys that have high heat and a slider, that's not the formula for Paul Goldschmidt right now to have a ton of success. I would be playing the splits more often than what they have been. I thought last night was the start of what they should probably be doing moving forward.
Yeah, I hope it is the start of what they should be doing moving forward, but I'm a little skeptical that they're going to do it, but I hope they do, because You mentioned the high heat against right-handers and sliders. Well, you know what that reminds me of? The role that Albert Pujols served. And I'm not saying that he's going to go on a tear like Albert did, but if Goldie's in that role, you can get away playing him against lefties at first base, and you can have him on the bench when you go up against a righty. And now all of a sudden, I also have a right-handed bat off my bench against a left-handed pitcher. You don't have that right now when he's in the lineup.
That's a good point.
And that's why that was the whole reason of acquiring Tommy Pham, was to take that role, to get a guy that could come in and get starts against lefties, but also be a guy that could come off the bench against a right-handed pitcher. I actually love the idea of Paul Goldschmidt. If you get to a spot where they say, oh, we've got a lane here. They've got Newt Gorman. Let's say Carp's the DH that day, for example, and they go to a big lefty out of their bullpen. Okay, well, here's my trump card. Boom. I'm going to play Paul Goldschmidt now. Now there's a little bit of that, okay, do we go to the left-hander here? There's a little bit of that deterrence factor of, okay, well, if we go here, now we've got to worry about Goldschmidt coming off of the bench. I like that idea because, it gives you probably your best starting lineup against right-handed pitching, but it also gives you that piece to potentially play late on in games and provide some thump off of the bench.
I know it sounds crazy, but if you're telling me my option is Paul Goldschmidt or Matt Carpenter against right-handed pitching right now, I'm taking Matt Carpenter. And that is basically the decision that you're making, because you're opening up that designated hitter slot by taking Alec Burleson out of the outfield and taking away whatever your DH was that day, which might have been Burleson, honestly. And you're saying, okay, Matt Carpenter's getting that slot now by bumping Burleson down to first base. I would rather do that. Burleson this year, Carpenter this year against right-handed pitchers, batting .240, 2% above league average offensively. Paul Goldschmidt batting .210 with a almost 25% below league average offensively. I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. It sounds crazy to say, because if you told me before the season, hey, you'd rather have Carpenter than Goldie against right-handed pitchers, I'd say something went horribly awry. Well, it has. And now we're into mid-August. Now is the time when you've got to make these difficult decisions. You got to be trying to win every single game down the stretch, because as Tommy Pham said the other day, basically 30 of the last 50 is what this team needs. You've won your last 2. Great start. You got to keep it going. The best way to do that is to put your best lineup out there on a day-to-day basis.
Here's a question for you, though, because when you're reacting to games after every single day,
sure,
I feel like at times it's hard not to fall into the prisoner of the moment sort of situation. And with Arenado having a good game last night, if it was reversed and Arenado was out of the lineup last night and Paul Goldschmidt had the night that Arenado had, do you think we'd be talking today about the importance of if Paul Goldschmidt goes on a run the rest of the season? Like, do you think we're just...
Goldie had his chance to do that, and then he went 0 for his last 18.
Hasn't Arenado, though?
Arenado is now heating up. This is it's trend lines, right? Trending in a certain direction. Goldie was trending up, and I was like, okay, I did have my moment like this, to your point, with Goldie. That was about a week ago, and I said, I want to see more, just like I am right now. I'm saying I want to see more with Arenado before I'm ready to buy in. But Arenado's has been a month. Goldie had a hot week. And we're like, okay, maybe this is the moment. And then right after that, following up that 3-hit performance with a double and a homer against the Cubs, the next 5 games were an 0 for 18 in the next 5 games, and then got the day off yesterday. So that's why I wouldn't be saying that, is because, to me, Goldie has shown us now consistently, even when he has a hot 1-week stretch, there is an 0 for something coming on the other side. It feels very Nolan Gorman-esque, but without the highs that we were hoping for from Gorman this season. Strikes out too much, does not end up having the consistency that we've seen from Goldie in the past. Arenado all year is hit for average. The problem has been power, and if we're seeing signs of real reasons for optimism with his swing speed, which could indicate, hey, maybe there was an injury that wasn't disclosed, and he's kind of talked about that a little bit as well. If he's getting healthy, we're seeing underlying numbers like swing speed starting to increase, and we're seeing the production that follows. That's why I start to believe a little bit more, because there's real data that backs up more than just a 1-week hot stretch, to your question on why I would be more optimistic now with Arenado than with Goldie. That's kind of how I view it, at least.
Yeah, that's where I am too. It's the trend line. And can you also look at positive numbers as well when you peek under the hood? It's one thing to go, oh wow, he's hit 300 in the last 14. But if I peek under the hood and go, oh, he's not really hitting the ball very hard, chances are I'm just going to go, okay, he's finding a little bit better luck. Now, a lot of
there's some of that with Arenado, to be fair. I was going to say, some of that expected batting average, expected slug. Now, granted, some people don't like that, but when you look at that, I say, okay, it's kind of the same as it was prior till he's swinging the bat harder. But him swinging the bat harder at that significant of an increase, 3 miles an hour, that is something that's worth at least keeping an eye on, even though
both BK and I are still skeptical of.
With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. Alex out for the next couple of days. He'll be back in next week on paternity leave this week. Baby number 3 has arrived. She is healthy. She's happy. It seems like everything's going great at the Ferrario household. He'll be back in with us next week. Coming up in about 15 minutes or so, some NFL quick hitters, including notes on the second-year quarterbacks around the league and a reason for pessimism on Bryce Young specifically. We'll get into that coming up at 11:30. But next, how are you feeling right now about the Erick Fedde experience coming off of his first 2 starts here in St. Louis? We'll talk about that next here on 101 ESPN.
This is a guy that even through traffic figures out a way to kind of limit damage, and that's exactly what he did. I believe he had a 27-pitch second inning and then a 36-pitch third, but after that he kind of settled in, had some quick ones, but those are pretty long innings, so taking him out after 93 made sense.
Better start yesterday from Erick Fedde. still not great, and he took a lot of pitches to get through the first couple of innings. Eventually settles in, goes 5, gives up the 1 earned run, walks 2, strikes out 6. That is the final line for Erick Fedde in his first home start for the St. Louis Cardinals. With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. T-Bone, how are we feeling about the Erick Fedde experience? We're 2 starts in. He's gone 10 innings. He's given up 6 earned runs, most of that coming in like basically 2 innings of work against the Cubs and then against the Rays. How are you feeling about it thus far?
Am I the only one who I've watched the first 2 starts and was like, blah? You know, last night kind of felt like the classic Lance Lynn bar fight moment where it was, there's a lot of traffic out on the bases, and then I look up and I go, oh, hey, he struck out 6 and got through 5 innings, which is kind of nice. But
It's what Randy used to say about Dakota Hudson. The best way to watch a Dakota Hudson start is to not watch it, and then the next morning to look at the final line. Be like, oh, wow, whip 5, gave up 1. That's crazy. Don't look at the strikeouts. Don't look at the walks. Don't look at the hits. Look at the final innings and runs. That's all that matters for him.
Yeah, he was good last night. Like, I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but, man, I watched Erick Fedde pitch, and I'm just like, man, this is such a Cardinals trade acquisition where it is clearly a, number 3 starter, and I watch him, and I just go, he doesn't really get me all that excited. Like, it's a lot of, if someone said, oh, you're going to the game tonight? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, what's the pitching matchup? And I'd go, Erick Fedde. Like, I don't know. I personally have watched the first 2 games of the experience, and really game 1, he had the 1 bad inning. And then last night, he pitches pretty well, works out of some traffic, but he's such the prototypical type Cardinal starter where he's a number 3.
Yep.
He's going to get through 5, 6 innings. And like you said, you just kind of squint and you go, I don't know how he did it, but somehow we got here.
I think this is exactly what I expected Erick Fedde to be. Now, he gave up more hard contacts against the Cubs in the first couple of innings than I was anticipating. And that was sometimes weird stuff happens at Wrigley. And yesterday, weird stuff happened as well, by the way. He threw to second instead of home because he thought that there was going to be the double play ball there, and he didn't expect that the guy from third, being a catcher, was going to go home, and then ultimately that scores a run against him, and that was the 1 run that scored against him. Had a play where he was supposed to cover first and then went around the first baseman, which was strange. Had a play where they had a perfect hit and run on, and it sneaks through the hole that Mason Wynn would typically be playing at. There was just some weird stuff that did lead to both hits and a run against him that normally you wouldn't necessarily anticipate. I think he was generally fine yesterday. Weird stuff happened, and it was a tough couple of innings where he couldn't seem to get anybody to chase. And that's the big thing to me as to why, when people went into the deadline and I was saying, guys, he has a 3 ERA. Shouldn't we be more excited about this? The counter to what I was saying is, yeah, he has a 3 ERA, but you don't expect it to stay that way. He's probably more of a true 4 ERA, probably more of a number 3 than a number 2 starter. And I think there's some truth to that. The reason why I liked the acquisition at the time, and I'm still really high on it today, is because I think Erick Fedde was as much about 2025 as it was about 2024. You have Erick Fedde signed for next year for $7 million. That is such a bang for your buck bargain for this team. And we'll talk about this coming up at the 12 o'clock hour. This team probably is going to need some bang for their buck additions going into next year, because I don't think the payroll is going to be going up, would be my guess. I think it's more likely to go down than up. And Fedde could be a guy that helps you upgrade your rotation for next year without costing you an arm and a leg. So you essentially got a head start on your offseason. You probably replaced Lance Lynn with Erick Fedde. That's an upgrade. You are a better team with Erick Fedde next season than you would be if you had to bring back Lance Lynn. And now you can see, hopefully, if you can trade Miles Mikolas in the offseason and you get similar production from Andre Palante for a 10th of the price. That's kind of how I view this. Is it great? No, but you've got a really solid number 3 starter, and if you can upgrade your number 2 slot in the offseason, you feel better about it for 2025. That's how I view the addition.
And I think the concern for me, again, I like the trade at the moment, and maybe that's still the reason that I really enjoy the trade is they gave up nothing. They gave up an injured Tommy Edman who's still not playing for the LA Dodgers, and you sent nothing to the Chicago White Sox. The fear, though, is that he's their 2 for the next 2 years. It's this year and next year. To your point on, hey, you got a good bang for your buck. I agree. It's $7 million. You cut bait with Lance Lynn. You save $3 to $5 million. I can't remember what his team option's at. I think it's 12. okay, well, now I'm saving $5 million, and I've got a guy that's going to give me better production. The problem is he's like the 2 for the Cardinals next year. I don't expect him to be searching for another number 2. And that's where it becomes where I watch Erick Fedde, and I don't know if it's so much I don't know if I should call it frustration, but it's not so much on him as it is like I know how the Cardinals are going to operate, so it's just kind of like my anger kind of boils over to him to where
because it's not his fault.
No, like he's a perfect number 3. The problem is like we both agree he's a number 3 who probably has like a 4 ERA at best. Problem is I can look at the Cardinals rotation and go, that's Kyle Gibson, that's Erick Fedde, that's Andre Palante probably next year, Miles Michaelis a little bit worse than that, but like you can see where Michaelis could have a Erick Fedde type year. We've seen it before anyway. So that's why when I watch him pitch, I'm like, yeah, okay, he's a good big leaguer, but this is the Cardinal way, and I don't like it that's the Cardinal way.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line from the 314. BK, you analyze statistics daily and judge off of those statistics what the players are, and now you're telling me that Erick Fedde's stats aren't real. Explain that a bit. I'm not telling you that his statistics aren't real, but I am telling you that sometimes ERA specifically can lie. It can be... manipulate is not the right word, but it can be a bit of a mirage. And what I mean by that is sometimes there is some luck that's involved with this. I know we don't like to give luck as a factor in sports, especially baseball, but it's real. I mean, last year, the guy that I would point to, he's not a pitcher, but he's a hitter, Alec Burleson hit the ball really hard consistently. And the numbers didn't show it. Like, if you just looked at his batting average, you'd look at it and say, well, that guy didn't produce. He's not a good hitter. It's just not the case, in my opinion. He was doing all of the things that he can control to get good results, but the ball was hit to people that were in the right positions, and sometimes that happens. And as a pitcher, when that happens, it's great. Nothing better, right? You get a hard hit liner to third base, you're like, hot damn, yes, that could have been a double. And instead, it's caught, and it goes into the box score as an out. You don't have to apologize for that, but over time, if the guys are consistently hitting the ball super hard against you and they're getting the ball in the air, they're hitting for line drives, like eventually that's going to come back to bite you. And Fedde is the type of guy where he's not going to strike out the world. He does, generally speaking, control the contact against him pretty well, but he's like Michaelis plus. He's got more strikeout stuff than Michaelis does. Honestly, he's probably more similar to Gibson. He's like Gibson plus. He controls contact a little better than Kyle Gibson does. He's got similar swing and miss stuff and strikeout stuff to what Gibson does. They both have that sweeper that they can play with, and they're going to keep the ball down for the most part. And when they don't, they're going to get hurt for it. That's kind of how I view Erick Fedde right now. And there's nothing wrong with having that guy in your rotation. He helps you. He makes you better. It was a smart move at the deadline. I still am super high on it right now, despite the 5.4 ERA through 2 starts. But that's who Erick Fedde is. So that's why when I look at the ERA, he had a 3.1 when they traded for him. It's not exactly representing who he is as a pitcher, even though I do think he's a pretty good pitcher.
And to that point, because I agree, like, luck is a major part of baseball, and it's why, like, I hate the pitch-to-contact pitchers, because what do you rely on? You rely on luck. So I just looked this up, because you were talking about ERA. So Fedde, right now, after even the 2 starts with the Cardinals, 3.28 ERA. The one guy ahead of him, 3.27 ERA, Cole Reagans. 2 entirely different pitchers.
Absolutely.
And if you told me, like, if I just said, hey, go watch a Cole Reagans start, don't look at his numbers, and go watch an Erick Fedde start. And then if I told you after you watch those 2 starts, they both have a similar ERA, you'd go, well, wait a minute. Cole Reagans, like, struck out 10 in 6 innings because he's averaging 10 strikeouts per 9, and Fedde's averaging 8. Like, watching Erick Fedde, he doesn't look like a 3.1 ERA guy.
Correct.
He looks like a 4 ERA guy. And again, like you said, that's not a bad thing, and it was a needed trade for the Cardinals because he upgraded the rotation.
And the other thing is, like, there are people within the Cardinals organization that literally do not look at ERA.
Yeah.
Like, I'm positive on this. I've talked to there are people in the organization that flat out, like, could not tell you currently what the ERA is for a single pitcher on the Cardinal staff because they don't look at it. They look at other stuff that will lead to what the guy should or should not be doing at that point in time. So there are guys on the Cardinal staff that can have really good ERAs, not necessarily right now, but in the past this has been the case, that they don't view as having particularly good seasons because all of the underlying stuff is like blinking red lights.
Like a Jake Woodford.
Yeah, that suggests like this is not sustainable, and yeah, they've gotten away with it thus far. Carr, John Gant's another guy like this. But eventually it's going to turn, and when it does, it's going to be ugly for the Cardinals. So that's something else to keep in mind as well. Is it's not just the ERA that they're looking at. In fact, for some of them, they flat out do not look at the ERA. They'll look at the other stuff.
What I would say, though, like when you talk about luck, I have a hard time pinning luck to Erick Fedde's success this season when he was on the White Sox.
Sure.
Like, how are you going to say that his wins just came from good luck and his stats just came from good luck
It's not
this
just
season?
that. Erick Fedde's a good pitcher. What I'm saying is I don't think he's a great pitcher.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't think he's a 1 and like maybe not a 2. Like he's a mid-rotation starter. Forget the number that you want to put on it. He's a mid-rotation starter, and some of that is due to good fortune. And that's not to say like he's never going to have good fortune again. He might. And he's got better defense here. He plays in a better pitcher's park, so like it might end up working out super well for the Cardinals. I'm still high on the acquisition. I'm just saying, like, I would not expect him to have a 3.1 ERA the rest of the year. That's all I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah, what I would say, though, is like, if you're setting your expectations based off of the first 2 starts that he's had for the Cardinals, like the first one I would just throw out. Like the first time on a new team, especially as a pitcher, like we saw last year how important the connection between pitcher and catcher is.
Sure.
Like when you're switching a whole new team, a whole new battery, like I don't put any stock into his first start.
Sure.
Agreed.
The second start looked better. So that's good. It's trending in the right direction. But based off of what he did in Chicago, like I would only expect it to be better here.
Here's to our conversation of luck. It was the second or third inning where the bases got loaded on him last night and he got out of it, or he had runners in the. That same inning occurred in Chicago and he gave up 5 in that inning. And why was it? Because it was single. All of a sudden, there's that 3-run homer. It's why we talk about slug, because it puts up a crooked number on the board. And then there's another home run and 4 runs are on the board. That same inning could have happened last night, and we're having a different conversation. And that's to our conversation of what makes him a mid-rotation arm is what do we talk about with 1s and 2s? Well, they strike out guys, and I think I said this on Monday, they don't give up that one crooked inning number that really changes their line. And that's what you've seen from Erick Fedde. Gave up the one big
and that's why he's better than Michaelis, because he's got more swing and miss stuff than Michaelis has.
Yeah.
Michaelis gets into that inning, and he's purely relying on batted ball. He has the worst swing and miss stuff Michaelis does this season in all of Major League Baseball among qualified starters. Fedde's like middle of the pack.
Yeah.
Fedde has more of that swing and miss stuff, and he absolutely has more strikeout stuff than what Michaelis does. That's where he's more similar to like a Kyle Gibson plus. He's a little better than Kyle Gibson. So how am I feeling about the Erick Fedde experience thus far? I feel kind of like I expected to. He's a really solid starter that made you better.
Yeah.
It also leaves you wanting a little bit more as a number 1/number 2 to pair with Sonny Gray. He's Tanner Hendrickson. That is Grant Francis, and I'm Brandon Kiley. In 15 minutes, we're getting to questions and answers. Katie Wu joins the show coming up at 12 o'clock. But next, time for some NFL quick hitters, including, is T-Bone's team going to be looking for a new quarterback after the season? And which of the second-year starters are you highest on? We'll talk about that next year on 101 ESPN. Hey, it's BK. Yesterday, I went to see my friends over at Victory Men's Health. I got my micronutrient lab back. What this means is they took a look. They look inside of the cells to find out, all right, where are your levels really at right now? And they found out that, hey, a couple of my things that I'm looking at right now, I need a little bit of help. Vitamin K was a little bit low. I'm already on a vitamin B12 as well. It's helping with my energy levels. If you wake up in the morning and aren't feeling like the best version of yourself, they can unlock your inner champion with Victory Men's Health. Whether that is helping with some weight loss goals, low testosterone, erectile dysfunction, there are a number of guys that are dealing with any of these specific issues. They can help you out with it over at Victory Men's Health. Maybe you want some vitamin infusions. They've got a vitamin IV that they can help you out with. Check them out today. They've got 4 great locations across the St. Louis area, and you can check them out at victorymenshealth.com. They're going to unlock your inner champion just the way they have for me at victorymenshealth.com.
Grant Francis here with the SportsCenter update, driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Cardinals clinched a series win last night as they took down the Rays 5-2. Erick Fedde won his first as a Cardinal last night. He went 5 innings, only allowed 4 hits and 1 earned run against. Tonight, the Cardinals look for the sweep of the Rays as it'll be Kyle Gibson going up against Shane Baz for the Rays. First pitch will be at 6:15. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at Londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Alongside Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. Let's dive into some NFL quick hitters, and let's start out with some news from T-Bone's squad. T-Bone, you sent this note yesterday. Tanner is a Rams fan still. Yes, you can yell at him if you'd like, but he's still a Rams fan despite them moving to Los Angeles.
Yeah,
and this comes from their beat writer over at The Athletic yesterday. Quote, I think after this season, quarterback Matthew Stafford will either come back to the table with the Rams to negotiate a new contract or work with them to explore his options elsewhere, end quote. A bit ominous. He had this weird contract situation that didn't really get discussed a lot when he arrived at training camp, where it was kind of a hold-in type of a situation, and they ironed stuff out. He's good to go. They got the contract figured out for him. But it effectively moved some money up to where, like, the team and him can both get out of the contract after this season if they really want to, basically, and he can get traded elsewhere. T-Bone, is this the final season that we're going to see Matthew Stafford in a Rams uniform, in your opinion?
I think it is. Just the way that they've handled this has been weird because Sean McVay really likes Matthew Stafford. There's a reason he traded Jared Goff away to go get him. But I think they also don't want to get stuck in a spot where they're going to constantly be, year-by-year basis with Matt Stafford. And what really makes me think this is the last year was, I think it was like right when camp started, Sean McVay was asked, because reports came out, hey, Matthew Stafford reportedly wants multiple years guaranteed on a new contract. Like, he wants like 3 years of guaranteed money. And McVay was like, yeah, that's true. And then the Rams settled on a 1-year deal, essentially. I think the Rams, my tinfoil theory here, I think the Rams are going to be players in Dak Prescott's market if he hits free agency next season, because you get younger at the quarterback position. You ultimately are going to have to pay the quarterback probably at some point top-end market value, whether that's Stafford at his age or you can go younger with Dak Prescott. I think the Rams are preparing themselves for if Dak Prescott hits the market, they go out and take a big swing at him, add him in. You also got Kupp, who they can get out of his contract because he's been dealing with injuries potentially next year. And all of a sudden, you've got this new wave of Dak and Puka Nacua leading the charge while Puka's on his rookie deal. They also really like the guys that they drafted, apparently, according to reports coming out of training camp, on their front seven.
Yeah, everybody does.
I believe that there might, if those guys end up being okay this year, all of a sudden you've got that money to spend at that quarterback position.
They've got the money to spend because Stafford's cap hit will come off of the books as well. So they're fine. They can make it work. They have constructed a roster around a highly paid quarterback. Man, moving on from Matt Stafford would be quite the power move. The one guy that you can really point to, because he's operated at a high level and he's done so in the NFC, would be Dak Prescott. And it makes you wonder, like, is Dak their target after the season? Is that the guy that they're going to be going after? He can't be franchised, so this wouldn't be a scenario where they have to trade assets for him. They could probably get something of significance in return for Matt Stafford. It makes you wonder, like, okay, what's this going to look like? Stafford available, Dak potentially available. We've seen this now over the last few seasons. It feels like every year there's 1 or 2 big-time quarterbacks that are made available either via trade or free agency. I think this might be the start of the way that things go moving forward. Like, Aaron Rodgers was made available last year. Saw a couple of years ago, it was Deshaun Watson. This offseason, it was Kirk Cousins. We saw Russell Wilson at the time was made available. Now, it didn't work out, but he was a big-time quarterback that I was shocked to see traded. I think you're now going to get 1 or 2 of these veteran big-time quarterbacks every offseason that's made available, and I think Stafford is likely going to be the next one.
And I think the Rams, 2 things here that also make me wonder about this is, one, we've seen the Rams not be afraid to take the swing at the quarterback position because they know it's the most important position in football. Because I remember when it came out that Stafford was there was talks that he could be moved from Detroit. I think it was Stafford and I think Matt Ryan in the same offseason. And I remember saying, like, hey, I think the Rams are going to be in on one of those guys because McVay was not happy with Jared Goff in that situation and did not think he could get back to another Super Bowl with him. I don't think he's at the same spot with Stafford. I think he still thinks he can win with Stafford. I think he's just concerned about his age. And the second thing, and injuries too. And let me tell you, they're missing 5 offensive linemen right now at camp. He's going to be getting hit a lot early on in the season. The second thing for me is I've seen Sean McVay kind of move through an offensive core at least once, even potentially twice now if they go the route that I'm talking about, because early on in his tenure, he had Jared Goff, he had Todd Gurley, Brandon Cooks, Robert Woods. That was kind of the 4 big pieces. What do? They move on from Gurley, they move on from Goff, and all of a sudden the team becomes, it is Stafford, Kyren Williams, and Cooper Kupp. Now I wonder if they are starting to make that shift of, okay, now it's Puka Nacua, insert quarterback here, and then potentially Blake Corum as the next running back as well.
All right. As we continue with some quarterback conversations, there was a piece on ESPN.com by, I think, one of the best young analysts in the game right now, Ben Solak, who's now writing for ESPN, previously with The Ringer. And he put together a piece on the second-year quarterbacks in the NFL. This includes Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, and, yes, of course, Aiden O'Connell. I want to start with Bryce Young. He had a great note in this. Now, EPA is estimated points added. It's this fancy, nerdy number for quarterbacks that's kind of gone wild. It's basically just how valuable are the passes that you attempt.
Oh, so it's like WAR. Oh.
Kind of. It's more like WRC plus or OPS plus, right? It like adjusts. So anyways, reason why I bring that up is because this is a note from him in his story about Bryce Young. Of the 50 rookie passers to attempt at least 200 passes over the last 15 years, Young's EPA per dropback was better than only Jared Goff, Josh Rosen, Jimmy Clausen, and Blaine Gabbert when they were rookies. So he's the 5th worst in the last 15 years among rookie quarterbacks. Goff ended up being a good player. Clausen, Gabbert, and Rosen very much did not.
And 2 of those, I think, were off the team the following year.
Do you believe that Bryce Young will be closer to Jared Goff or Rosen, Clausen, and Gabbert when all is said and done? Because those are the 2 directions that this thing could go.
Yeah, I think it's going to be closer to Rosen and all those other guys. I just don't see the potential with Bryce Young. In this piece, he does a great job of explaining, like, there are times where, like, he doesn't do a good job of avoiding sacks. He ends up missing on some deep throws because he doesn't have the arm strength or the accuracy. Okay, so what's the one thing I can look at and say, okay, you're great at that? At least Goff had a pretty good arm when he was with the Rams. And when you saw Goff, yes, it was ugly. A lot of it, too, was he was playing in Jeff Fisher's, like, 1970s style, let's run the ball every single time offense. And they had some okay weapons at that time. But you saw a little bit from Jared Goff, at least in terms of the arm talent. I don't think you saw that from Bryce Young. I think it is more likely he's going to end up being like the Jimmy Clausen type.
I'm with you, and I'm an Alabama fan, so even when he was at Alabama, I wasn't high on him coming out of Alabama. No, I wasn't. And just like,
I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the way that Bryce Young was discussed as a prospect.
Yeah, and I agree, and that's sort of why I'm not super excited for Caleb Williams.
Interesting.
I don't think he's going to be as bad as Bryce Young, but I'm not as high on him as others are. But I kind of saw that, like, Bryce Young just didn't do it for me at Alabama. Like, watching the games, like, he had the stats, but he also had a ton of players around him.
Yep.
And just watching it, just by the eye test, I was like, stacking him up against Alabama quarterbacks from the past, like, I don't think he really stacks up very well. And then, to be fair to him,
he reminded me more of Tua, like a lesser version of Tua than he did, like, C.J. Stroud or Anthony Richardson, right? There was no, like, overwhelming trait. Yeah. He was able to get out of traffic pretty well occasionally. Like, he escaped the pressures pretty well in college. Dude, defensive ends are 6'5", 250 pounds and run a 4.6 in the NFL. It's a little different running away from them than it is SEC defensive ends that are mostly like big hulking guys that are more there to eat space than they are to be like big time pass rushers. So that was always a concern to me. He didn't have a big time arm, and he's just really small, man. And I know this can be overplayed sometimes. Like, you can win with a shorter quarterback. But he's not only short, he's also slight. Like, he does not have a lot of bulk on his frame. That's very different than Kyler Murray. It's very different than even like a Baker Mayfield, who's a pretty big dude despite being short in stature. I was always concerned about it. It's why I like CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson both a little bit better than Bryce Young last year. And that's not me taking a victory lap. I said all along, like, if Bryce Young was the starting quarterback at Purdue, I don't think he's talked about as a top 5 pick, much less the number 1 overall pick. I think a lot of it had to do with he won a bunch of games at Alabama.
Yeah, I will say one thing, though, to be fair to him, like, he's in football hell right now.
Oh, absolutely.
So, like, to give him one little asterisk on this, like, if he's on a better team, he probably looks a little bit better. But at the same time,
Baker down in Tampa Bay, where it's like, yeah it's a passable starting quarterback. But if you take that at number 1 overall, just like with Baker, man, you missed in a big way.
Agreed.
All right, the other thing here, CJ Stroud versus Anthony Richardson. Who do you guys think is going to have a better season this year?
I still think CJ Stroud. I worry about Anthony Richardson's ability to stay on the field. I just don't know if he'll be able to stay healthy. If he does, though, I think he's going to have a really good season. I think he could possibly, by the end of this season, healthy football year, by the end of the year, you're going, is that guy a potential top 10 quarterback in the NFL? But I just worry, seeing him get hurt, and he's already been dealing with some stuff in training camp, I'm going to go with CJ Stroud.
I think it's hard not to go with CJ Stroud, and it's not to any fault of Anthony Richardson, but when you're not really on the field last year, yeah, he had a great start, and it was fun to watch, but, I mean, in some ways, this is still going to be his rookie season, because he didn't get the experience last year. Meanwhile, you saw CJ Stroud do it consistently all year, so it's hard to go against that this season.
I'm on Stroud as well, but I think it's closer than people are giving it credit for. I think Richardson has a chance to have a monster season this year, like in MVP conversations early in the year kind of season. I think he could be Cam Newton 2.0. He's got that kind of potential in him. With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. Questions and Answers is next. All right, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers. We've got some questions for Katie Wu, who joins us in less than 10 minutes. But let's get to this. Bob Nightingale just tweeted this out. Guys, the White Sox next managerial hire will, quote, certainly be outside of the organization, end quote. He adds that Skip Schumacher is expected to be a strong candidate, if not the leading candidate. My question for you guys, would you take that job if you're Skip Schumacher?
No, because I would not if I'm Skip, who proved to be a good manager in year one of his tenure in Miami, want to go from disaster B in Miami to disaster A of the Chicago White Sox organization.
No chance am I taking that job.
I'm not questioning this report of Bob Nightingale because the White Sox probably are saying, yeah, Skip's our main guy. I can tell you right now, Skip's not taking that freaking job. Skip's going to wait for the Dodgers to potentially open up. There was a report from John Heyman yesterday that Brian Snitker's considering retiring after next season. Those are the jobs, if I'm Skip Schumacher, that I'm looking at, not the freaking Chicago White Sox.
No chance.
Yeah, hell no. They just decimated their entire team. There's no chance if I'm a manager that's going, unless they offer me a boatload of money.
I wouldn't go.
A boatload of guaranteed money.
No.
I would think about it.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers from the 314. Guys, did you see Chapman strike out Machado on a pitch that was about 105 miles per hour, and they just looked at each other and smiled? Has anyone other than Chapman hit 105? I don't think so.
It was the fastest pitch in MLB this season. I saw that this morning on ESPN.
That guy's ridiculous.
Didn't Hicks get to 105 once?
I thought like
maybe he did.
103. But I'd have
Could
to
be
look
wrong.
that up. Chapman's absurd. For him to still be doing it at this level, at this point in his career, now, there's a lot of other stuff off of the field that's taken place for Chapman during his career. On the field, he's had like a borderline Hall of Fame case as a reliever in Major League Baseball. I don't think he'll get there. I don't think he's quite at that level yet, but he's right on the cusp of it.
I would love to know, and I think he's a case study for Major League Baseball. How does a guy that throws that hard not deal with injuries? Like, you look throughout his career, he's been like a 55 to 65 games appeared. Really, the only year that he kind of, and I don't know if it was injuries in 22, because I think he got cut by the Yankees, or the Yankees kind of told him to like go away. He's been healthy for the most part his entire career, and he's always thrown like 100 miles an hour. Like, how is that guy not broken? I've been told, like, guys that throw hard, Spencer Strider,
and you
throw
wonder
with
if it's
heavy
the frame,
spin.
right? He's a massive dude. Like,
Yeah.
he's both very long with his limbs and also, like, weighs like 240 pounds. He's a big guy. So I wonder if that has something to do with it as well. He's just built for that kind of velocity.
But he's an interesting case study, because I would love to know how he's been able to stay healthy and avoid injuries throughout his career.
He, in his career, has 1,200 strikeouts. He has faced 3,000 batters and has 1,200 strikeouts. For his career, is striking out 15 batters per 9 innings. Just an absurd career for Aroldis Chapman. And the Cardinals have still not been able to figure out how to hit against him because, frankly, nobody has. Coming up next, Katie Wu, Cardinals insider for The Athletic here on 101 ESPN. right, it's time to go out to the 101 ESPN hotline to be joined by our friend, the Cardinals insider for The Athletic. She's Katie Wu. Normally joins us each and every Monday here on the show, but I was out on Monday. T-Bone had the producer party. They decided, hey, let's push this thing back. So Katie joins us for a Thursday edition here on the show. We appreciate the time as always. Katie, how you doing today?
I am well, guys. A little weird, but not in a bad way. Hopefully it's a good Thursday. Cardinals have the chance to sweep the Rays today, so that's exciting. So, yeah, should be a good matchup tonight.
I'll tell you this. It's a much more positive discussion today that we're going to have compared to what we would have had on Monday coming off of whatever that was in Chicago. So I'm thankful for that. Let's start out with one big positive from last night, Katie. Nolan Arenado is showing some signs of life. He had 2 hits last night, including the 2-run double that ended up basically helping the Cardinals win that game. This is only his second extra base hit with runners in scoring position since July 5th, so over more than a month now that's the case. What are you seeing lately from Arenado? Because he's got an 800 OPS over the last month or so.
Yeah, that stat about the extra base hits with runners in scoring position really surprised me when I saw that you put it out there yesterday. I think what we're seeing from Nolan is just, look, there's been a lot of, I think, fan exasperation because there hasn't been a lot of production from him or Goldschmidt, and those are the 2 guys that are anchoring your team. But Arenado's performance or production has never been for a lack of effort, and I think we're all aware of that. I mean, he is consumed by trying to do as much as he can to right his own ship. I think what we're seeing is just him finally catching some breaks because he's done a lot of things that he just simply hasn't been rewarded for, especially in the first half. We're seeing now a more consistent swing. He's pulling the ball a lot more, that line drive, pulling the ball to the left field. That's how basically when Nolan is good, what he looks like. But a lot of these things where he's coming through, it's finally just the ball bouncing the right way for him in ways that we didn't see in the first half. And I think everyone, Nolan especially, can take a collective deep breath because he is starting to look like the old Nolan, if you will.
And Katie, speaking of the other pillar for the Cardinals that they thought coming into the season, Paul Goldschmidt, he had the night off yesterday against a right-handed starting pitcher. Alec Burleson was at first base. We talked about this a little bit earlier on the show. Do you think the Cardinals could look to kind of use Goldie more as a platoon bat where he starts against lefties where he's 15% above league average and have him on the bench against righties when he's about 25% below league average?
No, never. They're never going to make Paul Goldschmidt into a platoon bat. And I get the sentiment because of the lack of production, but Goldschmidt's going to be the starting first baseman throughout the rest of the year. The at-bats like Nolan's have been a little better, maybe not as much of the degree as Arenado's, but there's virtually no situation where Paul Goldschmidt is going to platoon this year.
Interesting. Katie, I'm curious. When you look at what we saw from Erick Fedde last night, it was, I thought, a lot better than what we saw from him in his first appearance as a Cardinal. I would also add there was some bad luck in that one, some weird stuff that happened. The hit and run was on, and Mason Wynn's not at his normal position, and it would have been an easy out, and instead it ends up being a big hit for them. And then the situation where he's going for the double play, guy scores on it. What did you see from Fedde last night? What have you seen from him so far in his first 2 starts?
I think just from a pitch perspective, both the cutter and the sinker played a lot more effectively for Fedde last night than it did in Chicago. And I think what we were able to see, the big difference for me on paper was in the second inning in Chicago, he had that big inning that he wasn't able to stop. Yesterday in the third inning, he was able to stop that big inning. And that completely changes the trajectory of your start if you get into trouble early and you can get out of it while mitigating the damage. Look, I've enjoyed getting to know Eric, somewhat well over the last couple of weeks, but it's not like we are all experts on him. I think when we're watching Erick Fedde pitch over the next 3, 4, 5 starts, it's all about his arsenal. It's all about really his changeup. He's going to get a lot of notice about his cutter, his sinker, the sweeper. Everyone loves the sweeper. I get it. But when Erick Fedde's at his best, his changeup is working because his changeup and the change in pitch speed allows everything else to play up. So I don't think we've seen top Erick Fedde in these 2 starts. I definitely think yesterday was more indicative of the kind of pitcher that he is rather than his start against Chicago. But I'm interested to see what he looks like when everything is working, when he can utilize that changeup, when he can mix pitches, mix speeds. He's a pitch maker like Kyle Gibson, like Sonny Gray, like Miles Michaelis. They're kind of all the same type of pitcher, and that's a different sort of issue. But when you look at Erick Fedde and what he can do, when he's able to control all of those pitches, he's really, really effective. So I'm interested to see what, when he gets full control of that changeup, what that looks like.
Katie, you mentioned that Fedde's like a lot of the pitchers that they have. Do you think that this rotation can get the Cardinals to the playoffs? Because it's been basically what I thought it was going to be this season, which is like slightly below league average.
I do. I don't think the pitching is the problem this year, and I don't think really you guys do either. The pitching was not meant to anchor the club to the postseason. The pitching was meant to just keep them afloat, right? Notch a quality start, eat some innings, be durable. We've heard this over and over again. Well, they've done that. They've done that for the most part. They've done their jobs. The bullpen's been great. They've been excellent. All year long, we've said they're the best part of the team. The difference of this team going to the postseason and not going to the postseason is the bats. Is can they hit? Can they hit consistently? Can they hit with runners in scoring position? Because the pitching on both sides, rotation and bullpen, has been pretty consistent, and I think the bullpen has exceeded expectations, but has proven that that's sustainable. The rotation, like we said, has done exactly what they were signed to do. Now it's the bats that you sign, the bats that you pledge money to, the bats that you're putting in the lineup every day, can they contribute in moments that matter? That will be, I think, the most pivotal part in the rest of August and heading into September if this Cardinals team can seriously make a run.
Katie Woo is our guest here on 101 ESPN. You can find her great work over at The Athletic and follow her on Twitter at Katie J. Woo. Katie, Nolan Gorman got the start yesterday, got the double, needed that in a bad way. It's been a rough go for Nolan Gorman. He's striking out 37% of the time on the season. It's one of the worst rates we've ever seen in the history of Major League Baseball. Based on your understanding from talking with Ollie down at the park or talking to others around the team, what do you think is the plan for the foreseeable future with Nolan Gorman?
I'm not sure about the foreseeable future, maybe the next 2 months or so. Look, they like Gorman because of the threat of power against righties. Now, that threat hasn't been there that often this season, as we know. So that's kind of the frustrating part here is there are already so many lefties in your lineup. It makes it really hard to consistently, match up. We talked about this, like how they can match up against opposing pitchers, I should say. I'm not sure how Gorman fits into that puzzle if he keeps striking out at the rate that he does. Now, he had a good game yesterday. That double was necessary, brought his average up to 202. I think with Gorman, what you're looking at is, can he find a way to minimize the strikeouts or just get that percentage down a little bit? He's always had the swing and miss. That's part of your game when you're a power hitter. Strikeouts come with that. Chase comes with that. That's what you're signing up for when you put a power hitter who has such high ceiling like Gorman in your lineup. What the Cardinals have to look at is with offense so scattered, can they continue putting in a guy who strikes out almost 40% of the time just for the hope that, the threat of power, as they like to say, comes through when they need it to. To me, the math doesn't really match up there. And you have other guys, other lefties, Burleson, Donovan. I think Tommy Pham can be used more than a platoon player. That I think can produce more consistently. But if you want the threat of power, then you keep Gorman in the lineup. It just depends on what the organization, what Ollie Marmol wants out of that role.
And Katie, you mentioned that they're too left-handed heavy. Thomas Saggese was named their minor league player of the month just a couple days ago. Is there any consideration for the Cardinals to try and bring that bat up before we get to roster expansion in September to provide a spark for them from the right side?
It's a good question, and I get it because Saggese's been excellent in Memphis. He's not on the 40-man, so that complicates things.
Can't do that.
Right. That's the hang-up there. They also, as we know, aren't going to bring up a top prospect unless he's going to play every single day. And I think they've been burned a little bit by bringing up prospects maybe early than they would have liked to or in hindsight would have preferred to. So I can see them being patient with Saggese. There are other players around. I just don't – it's complex because there is not a single – person in AAA, a hypothetical call-up, where it just clicks and makes sense. So I'm not sure at the moment. I think they're going to try to give Gorman a little bit of run, especially against righties, and see if he can catch a streak again. But, yeah, that 40% strikeout rate with him is something that's been concerning all year long.
They really hate bringing guys up and putting them on the bench. Like, even if it's what maybe, unlocks their potential to have the best roster at the major league level, like whether it's Herrera or Saggese, it's just pretty clear at this point. They'd rather just have Carpenter and Crawford, or last year what they did with Taylor Motter. They don't do that, right or wrong. All right, Katie, final question that I've got for you. Yesterday, I found this to be interesting. It was the lowest attendance for a Cardinals game if you look at a night game. in at least the last decade. It was 31,000 basically, and that's just the paid attendance. That's not necessarily what was in-house. You, I believe, were there. We could see on TV, like it wasn't exactly a packed house. What have you made of the Cardinals' attendance woes this season, if anything?
I think you're seeing what happens when a passionate fan base does not believe that an ownership is giving them a product that they should watch. And Cardinals fans are, again, they're one of the most passionate fan bases in all of sports. After last season, they were rightfully disappointed. Now they're kind of like, well, maybe we'll go, or maybe we'll go watch the team, but they don't really feel inclined to go spend their money. And it's going to create some sort of ripple-down effect, because if you're ownership, you're thinking, well, we're not getting any revenue, so we don't have any money to put into the team, which is, its own argument. But it's been baffling to me to see these crowds at Busch Stadium, especially during the week, where it's half empty, and it just doesn't feel like I'm at a Cardinals game. I mean, just 2 years ago, I felt like we were at a sellout almost every game. To me, it feels like the games in 21 when I started on the beat, and they were like 30% capacity because of COVID restrictions. That's what these games feel like, and it's disheartening, but I understand why fans feel the way that they do. Maybe this team can make a run and make an exciting September, and you'll see the ballpark fill back up. But it is, especially during the week or an interleague series like this, the Rays don't help either. It's bizarre to see Busch Stadium with the attendance that it has this year.
Have you talked to anybody around the club about this, Katie? I'm just curious.
Not anything like really on the record.
Sure.
Just kind of like, hey, we've noticed this, or it feels a little weird. But, the fans that do show up, you think about the Tommy Pham Grand Slam, and that was surprising that it got so loud given that it was only half capacity. So the fans that do show up are putting in a lot of effort, but you can certainly understand why fans aren't showing up or choosing not to spend their money and going to the ballpark.
Sure, yeah, I'm certainly not blaming fans for it. It's been interesting to see, we're going to talk about it in our next segment, but it's been a massive drop-off in attendance each of the last 3 seasons, but really it's come to a head in a pretty meaningful way this year. It'll be interesting to see what that kind of means for their offseason, for their payroll, and what kind of effect that has long-term. Because the Cardinals use that as a big part of how they fund their team. So it'll be interesting to see what that means, and that could become like a self-fulfilling prophecy, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a great point. You throw that in with the regional sports network uncertainty with Bally, and I'm not quite sure what that means for payroll next year, but I guess we'll find out soon.
Certainly going to be a conversation, Katie. We'll ask you about that another time. Thanks so much for the time, as always. Enjoy the game tonight. We'll talk with you again soon.
You got it, guys. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it. That's Katie Wu joining us as she does each and every week here on BK and Ferrario. Always appreciate her time. I want to talk about that coming up on the other side, because it was noticeable last night. You looked at the stands and you're like, damn, okay, the Rays are not a great team and they don't have stars. And so I understand why they're not a draw. And I frankly understand why you're not going to watch this Cardinals team. I don't blame anybody for not going out to the ballpark at all. I get it. That being said, it's something that Cardinals fans do. They just, as a part of our routine almost, we go to Cardinals games. It's what we do here in St. Louis, especially in the summer, especially prior to school or after school is let out. And so to me, it's really noteworthy when it's a night game. Yesterday, the weather was fantastic for early August. You could not have asked for better weather than what we got last night. And despite that, it was 31,000 fans as the announced attendance, and it was closer to 15,000 if you're looking at the actual attendance of people that were in the seats last night. And I went back and I was curious, because how does that compare to the lowest attendance that the Cardinals have had in recent seasons? Dude, all of them are weekday day games that were this low, or part of the school year. It's you're looking at April or May, which is always harder for any team across baseball. It's just you get lower attendance earlier in the season than you do later. It was a Wednesday day game, a day game on a Thursday, a makeup day game, and then a Monday night during the school year in an early May, and then a weekday day game as well. Those are the only games since 2012 that were lower attendance than what we saw last night. In other words, it was the lowest night game attendance outside of the school year that the Cardinals have had in almost 15 years. Want to hear from you guys. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. The mic drop feature is on the 101 ESPN app. What is the main reason that you're not going to Cardinals games right now? The main reason. Because there's a million of them, I know. But what is the main reason why you have not been going to as many games now as you have in the past? We'll get to that, talk about it ourselves coming up next here on 101 ESPN.
think you're seeing what happens when a passionate fan base does not believe that an ownership is giving them a product that they should watch. And Cardinals fans are, again, they're one of the most passionate fan bases in all of sports. After last season, they were rightfully disappointed. Now they're kind of like, well, maybe we'll go, or maybe we'll go watch the team, but they don't really feel inclined to go spend their money.
So that was Katie Wu on with us just a little bit ago. If you missed our conversation with her, check it out on the podcast page. 101ESPN.com and the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
I know that attendance becomes a hot button issue, and sometimes when you talk about it, fans feel like you're calling them out for not going to the game. And I want to say on the front end, that's not what we're doing here. I don't blame anybody for not going to the games right now. If you don't want to support this product, that is more than reasonable, man. They have not given you a lot of reasons to go support them. That being said, I was a bit surprised to see last night, not in a bad way necessarily, just it jumped off the screen how few fans were at the game. And it was confirmed when they announced the attendance for the paid-for seats. And whenever you see the number that they say on a broadcast, right, of, hey, the announced attendance tonight is 35,624, whatever it is. That's the number of people that paid to go to the game. That is not the number of people that attended the game. Those numbers are not released publicly. The Cardinals have them. They just don't release those publicly. Neither does any team in any sport. So last night, the announced attendance was 31,400. That is extremely low by Cardinals standards. So I wanted to look at, okay, just how low is that? How many times recently have we seen a lower announced attendance? And the answer, since 2012, and this is excluding 2020 and 21 because of the COVID restrictions, you just can't do a one-for-one comparison, is 5 games. 5 times since 2012, so in the last 12 years, you've had fewer people show up to a game, or you've had fewer tickets sold than you did last night. Now, those 5 games were 4 of them day games. One of them was a night game, but it was during the school year. It was in early May, which is always a harder sell, harder draw for the Cardinals and most teams across baseball than a game at this point in the calendar. So if you say, okay, non-day games, non-COVID seasons, non-school year, this was the lowest announced attendance that the Cardinals have had for a game in more than a decade. That's noteworthy, man. That matters to the Cardinals. They see that, and it matters to them. I remember when Mike Matheny was fired, they said part of the calculus behind that was you could look in the stands and it wasn't full the way that it used to be. So I did a little more research into this, T-Bone. The Cardinals have had 24 games this season with 35,000 or fewer fans as announced at the game. 24 games this year. For context for that number, like just how off that is from your typical Cardinals attendance. Here's how many games they had with that number, 35,000 or fewer, announced as the attendance from 2006 through 2019. It was obviously good baseball, so that's important as context here, but the number of games that they had in that stretch. 2006, 0. 2007, 0. 2008, 1. 2009, 0. 2010, 0. 2011, 12. 2012, 7 games. 2013, 1. 2014, 0. 2015, 0. 2016, 2. 2017, 0. 2018, 2. 2019, 0. It's rare for this team to get 35,000 or fewer at the games. Until you go back to the early 2000s. And then it becomes a little more common again. Now, this is prior to Bush 3. This is at Bush 2. But in 2000, you had 17 games of 35,000 or fewer. 2001, 25 such games. 2002, 32 such games. 2003, more than half of the games at Bush 2 had fewer than 35,000 as the announced attendance that season. 2004 even, one of the best Cardinals teams that we've ever seen, 105 wins that season. They had 35,000 or fewer fans in attendance 33 times that year. And the reason why I bring that up as the backdrop to our conversation, and I promise we're going to get to some of your thoughts on this as well. We're going to talk about this in the next segment too. But I wanted to provide some of the information as the backdrop to our conversation because I think it's super important. It makes me wonder, T-Bone, and I've had Cardinals fans telling me this over the years, and I think this evidence certainly supports it. This is a fan base that reacts to getting to a World Series and nothing else. That is what you react to. based on the evidence. Because in 2004, they won 105 games, and there were almost half of them at which there were 35,000 or fewer in the stands. Go to the World Series that year, and then boom, 2005 attendance spikes in a massive way. They really don't look back. 2006, go to the World Series again, and new ballpark. And then in 07 through basically 2010, they don't look back on attendance. And then suddenly it starts to drop off again in 2011, prior to the next World Series that they were able to get to. And then it spikes again. It goes back up for 12 and 13. Go back to another World Series. It continues to spike in 14 and 15 and 16 and then 17. And then it starts to drop back down a bit in 18, 19, and then into the COVID season, of course. There is a very clear tell of, like, if you get to 5 years or so without getting to a World Series, or a team that fans really grasp onto because of the winning, forget the stars, forget anything else, but the winning is what sells. That seems to be what is driving attendance for the Cardinals. And I'm curious, on the text line, 314-399-9646, and the mic drop feature, does that resonate with you? Does that feel right to what your attendance behaviors are? Like, do you need to see a team get to the World Series for you to feel reconnected to the Cardinals now that it's been more than a decade since the Cardinals have been able to be in those games that matter the most at the end of October? Because it feels like the numbers would suggest that that's the case. But I'm curious, because this is more of a feel thing, an emotion thing, than it is a numbers-based thing.
Yeah, and I think when you look at these numbers, I think you're spot on of it. It has to be almost World Series or bust mentality, kind of, you know, teams or fans are going to grasp more onto the World Series teams. I've kind of pushed back on that notion a little bit. I've always said it's more about just October success rather than just like, hey, get to the World Series. That's what really drives it. But these numbers seem to indicate what you were referring to there of, hey, the World Series teams, those are the ones that end up bumping up your attendance numbers when you look at them. And that's why, like, when we had the conversation, I think probably a month ago, of, hey, shouldn't we care about the regular season? Shouldn't we be judging the Cardinals on what the regular season is? And both me and Alex were on the side of, no, it's what happens in October. You know, the Cardinals don't get judged on their regular season success because the fan base doesn't really care if they win the division or get the wild card. What they care about is, did they end up getting deep in October? Those are the teams that they really like to look back on. They don't care about the team that won 85 games and then was bounced in the wild card round, or that even the 2019 team, which wasn't a great team. No, fans didn't really like that team, and they got to the NLCS and think still people looked at that team and were like, no, I don't know. I still don't really like that Cardinals team. I think it is a kind of World Series mindset or bust for Cardinals fans, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I like the fact that there are high, super high expectations here in St. Louis for such historic franchise here with the Cardinals.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I mean, also it's fandom, right? Like, you need to have a pull for you to really, truly, like, be all in on a team. That makes all the sense in the world. But I feel like we hear a lot about how the Cardinals, like, they don't have the stars that are pulling you to the ballpark, right? And, like, for me, that resonates. That's how I feel. Like, I feel like right now, I enjoy watching Mason win. I like watching Alec Burleson. But that's not the same as, like, going out to see Jim Edmonds or Scott Rowland or Albert Pujols. Those guys were superstars, best at their positions. Yeah, like, that's a different level of excitement that is bringing you down to the ballpark. But when I looked at, like, okay, what was the attendance when those guys were here at the beginning of their tenure? Like, look back to 2003, for example. And the attendance then was worse than the attendance now. Like, it's hard for me to say, okay, in 2003, when they had Rowland and Pujols and Edmonds and Renteria, guys that future Cardinals Hall of Famers all across the board, and a team that ended up winning in 2003, 85 games, and then in 2004, 105 games, and eventually got to the World Series. When that attendance basically mirrors this one, it's hard for me to say that it's about the stars. It feels like it's about the winning in October, and it's about not having that team that was able to break through in a meaningful way. And so, like, it feels as though that's what's driving this. And so it makes me wonder, like, if I'm in Bill DeWitt's shoes right now, I'm looking at these trends that you've seen now for a 25-year stretch under their ownership, essentially, where the one thing that did it was getting to the World Series. That's what it required. And not winning it necessarily, but getting to the final games in October. And if I'm in those shoes, it makes me wonder if it's worth it to like take a step back to then take a massive step forward. And I've always pushed back against that idea, but if the attendance is down now, and that's a big part of what drives their revenues and what drives their payroll, maybe it is worth it for them to take a step back and say, okay, let's cut some money here and get some better draft picks for a couple of seasons, and not tank, but like take a step back, right? And then really push forward based upon us having that young talent that is coming through our systems. It's something that I think you at least have to consider based upon some of this.
Yeah, and especially because kind of where you are right now, we've talked about this, you've got so much more money, not more money, but you have quite a bit of money already committed to next year. You know, it's not like a ton of payroll comes off the books and you can go, oh, well, sweet, we've got like $60 million to spend. We can go out and have a Phillies-esque offseason or a Dodgers-esque offseason of we can go sign like 2 big free agents. No, they've got quite a bit of money on the books for next season. To where, to your point there, I wonder if they are going to explore the potential of, okay, cut back payroll, especially with the RSN situation that also will play into this in their decision-making in terms of financially. Cut back your payroll a little bit, try and take a couple steps back, and try and get out of the muddy middle, because that's where they've been stuck for the last handful of years. They've been stuck in the middle, and they don't necessarily know how to get out of it. And I think you're seeing that with some of the offseason reaction or offseason decisions, along with some of the decisions like their trade deadline, for example. They didn't go and make a big splash at the trade deadline. It was kind of a middling trade deadline where they sold off some active pieces on their roster and Tommy Edman, who they thought could help them, but also brought in a couple pieces as well.
Somebody on the I think it's Lisa on the text line said Tony La Russa and Whitey Herzog set the standard. We're not puppets here. This is not a team that people believe in. I'm totally fair. This is not me pushing back on necessarily all of that notion, but like Tony La Russa was the manager in the early 2000s, and the attendance, again, mirrored what it is right now. Like the attendance that you're seeing at the ballpark today is the closest comparison that you can get in the last 25 years for Cardinals baseball is the early 2000s. And the early 2000s was good baseball. Like you had Albert Pujols making his debut in the early 2000s. They added Scott Rowland to those teams. They had Jim Edmonds on those teams. So it was not a lack of star power. It was not a manager that people didn't believe in. They had a general manager that people really liked at the time, and that was adding star talent. And yet the attendance was down. And it was coming off of the 90s, which obviously weren't the greatest time by any stretch for this organization in terms of the winning. You did have the 98 chase for Mark McGwire, and that brought a lot of fans back into the stands. But then that dipped again in the early 2000s. So I think it's interesting. I think it's really fascinating, and I do want to hear from you guys. We're going to spend the next segment basically getting your thoughts, because these were ours. Now I want to hear from the fans. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line, and the mic drop feature is on the 101 ESPN app. What do you do with those numbers that we just discussed? The closest thing that you can mirror the current attendance to for the Cardinals is the early 2000s. Is it just championships, really, that drive the attendance for the Cardinals? Like future years after a championship, that's where you allow yourself to buy in. Is that the case for you? We'll talk about that coming up next. Hear from you guys on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Cardinals took home a series winner last night as Erick Fedde picked up his first win as a Cardinal, going 5 innings and allowing only 4 hits and 1 earned run against as the Cardinals beat the Rays 5-2. Tonight, the Cardinals will hope to sweep that series against the Rays as they'll turn to Kyle Gibson on the mound, going up against Shane Baz for the Rays. First pitch will be at 6:15. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
All right, so we're talking about Cardinals attendance because that's what we do here. No, in all seriousness, I do think that this feels different. We've talked about it in the past, and it's been like, whoa, Cardinals announced 32,000 last night, and it's a one-off, right? And then it ends up coming back up. The Cardinals play against the Cubs for a weekend series, and it's 38,000 the entire weekend. And fans, generally speaking, come back to the stands. Or there's like an Albert Pujols second-half run in 2022. Attendance boosts again. And, like, everybody kind of goes their merry way. This year's different, like, legitimately different. And I'm not just saying that. The numbers back it up. There's been 24 games this season of 35,000 or fewer announced as attendance. That matches the last 2 years combined in terms of games with 35,000 or fewer fans in the stands. That's a big number for the Cardinals, and they've still got a lot of games to be played at home the rest of this year. It's probably going to be the fewest or the most games with 25,000 fans or fewer in the stands since like 2003. There's been more than 20 years since we've seen something like this. They're going to finish like 6th or 7th in attendance this year in Major League Baseball. That's not normal for the Cardinals, and it's going to have an effect on their bottom line, and that's going to make Cardinals fans probably angry in the offseason, understandably so, because the Cardinals are going to say, since you didn't come out to the games, we now have to drop our payroll. That ain't going to go over well, but I'm just preparing everybody for probably what's likely to happen in the offseason.
Surely the DeWitts won't just rip the Band-Aid off like that.
Yeah.
So sugarcoat it a little bit.
Keep that in mind. That's why I think it's a very relevant discussion. In the last segment, we talked about why this is most closely resembling what happened with attendance in the early 2000s and how they had stars. So that doesn't seem like the explanation. It feels like it's about World Series, but I want to hear your guys' thoughts on it. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. The mic drop features on the 101 ESPN app. Let's start out by hearing from Aaron on his thoughts on the attendance drop.
It's easy, BK. Since the DeWitts don't care to win championships anymore, I don't care to go to the games and spend my money. Easy. And not only that, like, you come out and make all these fake excuses that, you know, oh, well, we can't do this, we can't do that, and, you know, no. You are the St. Louis Cardinals. You should have stars. You should be developing quality players. You should be trying to win a championship every year, period. But since the DeWitts don't care, why should the fans? Easy.
I think that's fair. The funny thing is, like, their payroll has kind of stayed in line, roughly speaking, with where it's been. It's dropped a little bit this year. Like, I think they're 12th in Major League Baseball in payroll. They've been closer to, like, they're in that 8 to 12 range most seasons, and they'll tell you that, like, the revenues, it's in line with revenues. Now they're 12th. Maybe they used to be 8th, something like that. So keep that in mind, but that certainly feels like the mindset, even if it's not actually the mindset. Let's hear from Lisa.
Hey, guys. Good question. This deterioration of attendance has been going on over time. Cardinal fans raised on Whitey or Tony or one or the other. We know what good baseball looks like, and this is not a good product. It is not. It's a 500 product. You have a 500 attendance, so they're getting what they paid for. But in a nutshell, they are not committed to winning at the highest level. They are not. So that's what it comes down to. They're half-assed, so your fan base is going to get that way. All right. Thanks so much, guys. And, one more thing. If you could bring Skip Schumacher on here where I know he's not a glorified puppet and he's going to demand winning again, you watch him show back up all day, every day. I'll hang my hat on that. All right. Thanks, guys.
Okay, well, 2 things, and I'll start with the manager.
Sure.
Thanks for the mic drop, Lisa. I actually don't know if Skip is much more of a pull-in than Ollie Marmol would be. I think there'd be some slight increase.
I don't think most
the manager's
fans go to the games because of the manager.
And the funny thing is because I've seen some of that on the text line as well of, like, bring in Skip. Man, I don't think Oli Marmol could have said a more perfect line in his open introductory press conference of, the expectation is for us to win a World Series. And it got overlooked because Mo immediately at spring training was like, oh, my rookie manager, let me tell you, we want to win the division. Not the World Series, the division. The second thing for me is I do think there is something to the aspect of bringing in stars. I think where the frustration comes with the Cardinals, because you mentioned their payroll, and it's been pretty stagnant in that 8 to 12 range. And we've talked about this on the show all the time, is they can go get those top-tier guys, like when the Harper one was available a couple years ago. Even looking at the pitching market this year, looking at like a Blake Snell that was available. They can go get those guys, but they always settle for that second tier. And typically when you settle for that second tier of guys is when you end up looking at those contracts going, this is a disaster. Look at the Steven Matz contract.
Sure.
Steven Matz has been okay when he's healthy, but a lot of his time he's not been healthy, so you see the impact on his pitching performance and a lot of time spent on the IL. I think that's where you get the idea from, whether you want to say like the DeWitts and some of their comments definitely do not play into their favor, like especially when Bill DeWitt III was on a podcast not that long ago saying, kind of laughing at the idea of, oh, you're going to take it to ownership by showing up? Well, guess what impacts our payroll? That didn't help. But also the idea of, well, they're always in that second tier. Like we bring up the first tier guys in the offseason because we're a sports talk radio show, and what else are we going to talk about in the offseason? The immediate reaction is from our listeners on our text line, on our mic drops, isn't, yeah, I like that idea. They need a star. They're not going to do that. They never go play in those markets. And I understand the frustration, and I think that's where it's at.
Because Alex gets pre-mad at them for not going out and considering any of those players. And I'm like, well, how do we know that they're not going to? He says, because I'm a Cardinals fan. Yeah. I know what they're going to do. He did it this offseason. We both were like, no, come on. They surely. Yeah. And then like 2 weeks later, we had Lynn and Gibson. 90 games last year, Alex. Of course they're going to change their ways. And the answer was they're not. They don't change their ways because this is who they are. And it's not always for the worst. Like sometimes being more of a conservative approach is prudent. It can be the right way to go about things because you miss smaller. The thing though is like you also win smaller. Like the contracts that you get right are like solid contracts for you, right? You go out there and you get Andrew Kittredge, for example. Nice move. Good move by the St. Louis Cardinals. It has worked out for them, no doubt about it. But when you aim to be like just a really solid team in that regard, your wins are decent and your losses are not killing you. Like it's not killing them that Steven Matz has barely pitched for them this season. It's not helping, but it's not killing them. If they had a Garrett Cole or a Jacob deGrom who was barely pitching for them, dude, it would be a disaster. Like they would have $40 to $50 million of payroll just sitting on the IL all season. So that's kind of the way that they view it. But the upside is, hey, if you hit on those, if it works out for you, you have one of the best pitchers in baseball. And now suddenly we're looking at this team and it's a real contender. So you miss big, you win big. That's what some of these other teams are doing that the Cardinals have not.
I think one thing that I'm curious about, and I agree with the notion that it is extremely frustrating that it feels like the Cardinals are always swinging to win the division and not win a World Series or, compete deep into the playoffs. It does feel that way, and that is frustrating. But at the same time, like if we're talking about payroll and effort spent on bringing in players, like if this team was the New York Mets, who have failed miserably at spending big and actually hitting on them over the last 2 years, like they haven't been a good baseball team. Do you think that obviously the effort is there, but do you think that there would still be a similar fan support as to what the Cardinals have, as to what the Mets have? No, because there's a different level of effort?
I think it's just winning.
I agree.
That's what I'm coming back to is like, man, when I saw these numbers for the early 2000s, this is negligence on my part. It's ignorance. I had forgotten what the attendance was like in the early 2000s here in St. Louis, just totally being candid. And when I looked back into it last night, because T-Bone, we did the same thing. You looked at it and you're like, hey, look at 2007. Like, wow, that was worst attendance since like 2012. That's crazy. And then I started going back even further and I was like, man, it's kind of wild how low the attendance was in the early 2000s. Because like when we talk about attendance, typically it's about the stars. It's about coming out to the games to see like really great baseball players or the manager. Like I hear all of these different things that are put into it, and individually, all of it honestly makes sense. Like it appeals to me too to go watch stars. I go to Cardinals games a lot of the time because I want to see the other team's stars, right? Because I see a lot of the Cardinals, but when Shohei Ohtani's in town, I want to make it down to the stadium to see that guy in person. I want to see Bryce Harper in person. I want to see Aaron Judge and Juan Soto in person. So that appeals to my baseball sensibilities as well. So I get that. That makes sense. But then when I look back and it's like, man, 2001 to 2004 was their lowest attendance in the last 20 years. Well, those were also teams that had superstars littered across the roster, a Hall of Fame manager, and a guy in charge that should probably be wearing a red jacket.
3 Hall of Famers on that roster: TLR, Roland, Pujols, and arguably should be 4 with Jim Edmonds.
Absolutely. And so, like, I think it's about the winning, and not just winning in the regular season. Like, not winning, even 100 games in 2004 wasn't enough. It's winning in the postseason, and not just like getting to the NLCS. It's getting to the World Series, dude. It's winning pennants. That's what appeals to this specific fan base in this town. And until they start getting back to that, I think this is what it's probably going to look like, because it's been so long. It's been more than a decade now since they've gotten to that place. So I want to hear from Clayton. We'll hear from some of you guys as well coming up on the other side. We're going to do the junk drawer a little differently. Normally we do something kind of off the beaten path.
Cardinals belong in the junk drawer?
We're going to stick with this today because I think it's worthwhile. We'll do that coming up next. Hear more from you guys. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. The mic drop features on the 101 ESPN app here on BK and Ferrario. With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. Normally, our junk drawer is a little different. We can take the bed down today. We don't have to have that underneath the conversation because normally we do stuff that's kind of off the beaten path. We'll talk about random things. We talk about sports media. We talk about whatever is the latest thing in the news. Today's going to be different. We're going to continue our conversation about the Cardinals' attendance, and we're going to do this really quickly and continue it on the other side as well. Because I think it's a good conversation to be had, and I think the fans deserve to have their voice heard in this because ultimately this is about you. You guys are the ones that are determining whether or not you want to go to the games. And that's leading to the Cardinals having what is probably going to go down as their worst attendance overall since 2004. It's the worst attendance probably at the end of the season in the last 20 years in a non-COVID season. So I think it's worthwhile to hear from you after last night's game where they had 31,000 as their announced attendance and probably closer to like 15 or 20 in actual attendance at the stadium, to have this conversation finally. So let's hear from Clayton. Why is it that Clayton thinks that fans aren't going to the games this year? And is it just totally tied to the fact that this team hasn't won a World Series in the last decade?
For me, it's a culmination. It's a bunch of little things. The team's not that exciting. There's a constant, the Cardinals are better run than any other organization, like within the production media that's being consumed. Every time you hear a new player come here, it's like, I always loved the Cardinals organization. It's almost like they almost hold them at gunpoint when they say it. There's a sort of, hey, we've done this before, fans, let us handle it vibe that I feel from the front office, whether it's meant to be that way or it's not meant to be that way, I don't know. There's a sort of, hey, you guys like Matt Carpenter, right? Yeah, we'll bring him back. Is that we're with our Pujols, so they're running on a little bit of nostalgia. It's kind of just a bunch of little things that culminate, and then the team's not that exciting to begin with. So it's like, what are we doing, guys? Why are you trying to spoon feed us? I get we're passionate, but I don't know.
Yeah, I
think there's a million different factors that go into this.
And I do find the one that he talked about where you get the kind of front office, whether it be kind of, hey, let us handle it. Because I remember, I think it was last year, probably around this time, after the Cardinals had sold off all their pieces. I can't remember who it was, but someone had asked Mo, like, hey, why should fans have confidence in you as the guy that is going to be the guy that's going to turn this thing around? And he said, well, look at my track record. And the moment he said that, I was like, someone in PR, please tell him that was terrible. Because a lot of fans are going to look at his track record and say, well, we're not winning in October. Sure, you're building these teams that are above 500, but you're not winning. And that is what is the most important part. So I think that is one that certainly ties into this of there is so much frustration towards Mo. And I think it is because of the, if you want to call it lowering of expectations or the lack of winning in October, both of those combined, I think there is a lot of disconnect between the fan base and then the stuff that you hear from the front office and from ownership. Because when he said, like, hey, the Cardinals, they used to be the team that, hey, we did things the right way. The Cardinals got passed by baseball. They got passed by in a meaningful way, and they are still in the catch-up phase of trying to catch up with the modern game.
Somebody on the text line said, guys, when was the last time that the Cardinals drew fewer than 3 million fans over the course of a season? That one comes from the 618. Just looks this up. The last time they had fewer than 3 million fans, which they are currently on pace to do. They're currently on pace for 2.9 based on their average attendance, and that average attendance could go down depending on what we see the rest of the way. It was 2003. So it's been more than 20 years since the Cardinals failed to get at least 3 million fans in the stands over the course of a season. Before that, you have to go back to 1997, and that was in the stretch of like 90 to 97. The Cardinals were in a pretty bad place when it came to attendance relative to their own standards. Part of that was the 94-95 strike. Part of that was the baseball wasn't particularly good in that stretch of games. And then, of course, 98, everybody comes back to the stands. We all know why. Mark McGwire did his thing, and that sustained for the next 4 or 5 years. They added stars to the team. They had some success. And then by 2003, it started to get stale again. And then in 2004, it kind of remained stagnant. They were in that like 2.9 to 3 million fans from 02 to 04. And then boom, after they go to the World Series in 2004, it's off to the moon in terms of attendance. So that's kind of the relative history of what the Cardinals have been at. Let's hear from Tim One more on this before we go to break, and we'll hear from more of you guys. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Mic drop features on the 101 ESPN app. Let's hear from Tim on his thoughts on the attendance.
I think the reason the fans aren't showing up to the Cardinals is because the mediocre and lack of trying to be the best. It's not about downtown because people are showing up for STL City games and they're showing up for Battlehawks games and even Blues games. But it's the inability or the lack of desire for the front office to go try to be the best. Go through the entire starting lineup and see who's a top 10 player at their position in the league. Can't really find them. So we need to strive, their front office needs to strive to be better.
I think there's some truth to that. I also like the one other thing, like Tim makes a great point about downtown, first of all. Now, if you don't want to take your family downtown because of all of the different factors that go into it. We don't need to have a political conversation right now. That's for a different show. We'll do a podcast on that a different day. But that's fine. Like, totally understandable. You can do whatever you want with your family, and you do not need to feel like obligated to go down there if that's not something that you want to do. However, and it's different in terms of the numbers, right? You're having 20,000 fans tops for game of the Blues, 15 to 20 for City. That's a lot different than getting 40 plus for a Cardinals game. However, it's pretty clear, like, fans are willing to go down there if they want to support the product. They're willing to. The difference is they don't want to go down there for Cardinals games right now, and that makes sense to me. I totally understand that. I've also seen a lot of people saying something. I haven't seen it as much on the mic drops yet, or heard it as much on the mic drops, but our text line has a lot of people that are saying something about the cost to go to a Cardinals game. Guys, you can get into a Cardinals game tonight, tickets for $7 on SeatGeek. $7 after fees. Like, a ticket will cost you $1, and then you add in the fees, which are significantly more than just the ticket itself, and it's $7 to get into the game. Family of 4, you're going to the game for $30 tonight. If you want to, there is free parking available. Now, it's street parking, and it will require you to walk a little bit, but you can park for free. When you get into the stadium, you can bring your own food. You can bring a cooler. You can bring your own food. You don't have to buy stuff when you get down there. And so you could make it $50. Take a family of 4, have a night at the ballpark together. I'm not telling you you need to do that, but if you want to go to a Cardinals game right now, there are ways to do so without paying an arm and a leg. That's just one thing that I would say is, like, it can be, if you want it to be, it can be a relatively inexpensive night out with the family. It's not always that way. Tonight is different because, again, I don't think there's going to be a lot of fans out there tonight, just like last night. But that is something to keep in mind, is that if you want to make it a more inexpensive night out, you can do that. It can also get super expensive super quick. If you're parking closer, if you are planning to get drinks and eat while you're there, like, it gets a lot more expensive very quickly. But you can do it the other way if you want to. With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. We're going to stick on this, I would assume, for a decent portion of the rest of the show. Want to hear from you guys. The attendance last night, one of the lowest attendance that they've had in more than a decade. And if you're looking at this season, it's their lowest attendance in 2 decades. What do you make of that? Is it all related to the lack of championships? Hear from you guys on the mic drop feature coming up next here on 101 ESPN. All right, so we're talking about the Cardinals' attendance because last night was an abnormal level of attendance for the Cardinals. 31,400 was announced. It was a weekday night game, which is not normal for them. Typically, when they have an attendance this low, it's a day game, it's part of a doubleheader, it's a makeup game, those kinds of things. Or, May 6th, for example, against the Mets. They had 31,000 come through the turnstiles. It's during the school year, so you expect there to be weeknight game, Monday night against the Mets, a little bit lower attendance in that area. But this was not in the school year. Beautiful weather last night, night game, and they still had 31,000. So it opened up the conversation of, okay, why is attendance so far down right now? And then we looked into it, and really it's at its lowest point since like 2003, which is interesting in and of itself because 2003, it's in the midst of some really good Cardinals teams with Hall of Fame level talent. So it kind of knocks that explanation out the window, in my opinion, when they had 42 games that year of 35,000 or fewer that were in the announced attendance. So we want to hear from you guys. We've given you certainly a lot of our thoughts. Want to open things up to the text line 314-399-9646 and the mic drop feature, which is on the 101 ESPN app. Let's hear from Brett on why he thinks attendance is down right now.
I think what you said is spot on with it not being a winning product. The other issue is, in the age of social media, you have Mo saying certain things and then, from a fan's perspective, being lied to or, not fully living up to what he's saying. In previous years, we are going to add to the payroll. All right, well, they added Wilson Contreras. The payroll go up? Technically, it's the disconnect of not what the fans thought they were going to do. It was, we're going to add starting pitching. We added Sonny Gray. They were all right. Where's the next move? Where's the Blake Snell? The big competition move. Well, it's Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson. It's the disconnect, and the fans feel like they're being lied to. When, are they being truly honest? Not sure.
I think there is some truth to that. Like, I think the biggest reason, my guess, this is my own hypothesis, as to why attendance is down to pre-2004 standards is because it has been since 2014 that you've had a real contender, in 2013 since your team has won the pennant. I think that is like number one with a bullet, the reason why attendance is where it is right now. Like, that's the biggest factor. Beyond that, if you want to look at like, okay, but why? Why have the Cardinals failed to get to the World Series? Why is it that all of these other things are a part of it? There's also, it's expensive. If you want it to be, like parking is expensive if you don't want to walk. Getting food at the games is expensive if you want to have that experience and don't just want to bring your own stuff. Drinks, incredibly expensive. So that's a factor. Downtown, not wanting to go down there, that's a factor. The club having a president of baseball operations and a manager that a lot of people appear to have a large disapproval rating on, maybe a factor. The team not succeeding in general, that's a factor. And then beyond that, I think it is a lot of like, hey, we've kind of been sold a bag of goods here. We want to believe in the Cardinals, and yet every time that we say like, okay, this is what it would take for us to believe in this team. And I think most of the time it's pretty reasonable. Like, hey, last offseason, could you get a number 1 and a number 2 starter? Could you do that for us? And the Cardinals like, well, what about like a number 2 and a number 4 and a 5? I was like, no, that's not what we asked for here. And so, like, you go to an offseason where Bryce Harper's available, and they're like, well, we have a Bryce Harper internal in Tyler O'Neill. No, you don't. You don't. There's one Bryce Harper, and he signed with the Phillies, and look at what the Phillies have done since they signed him. That's the kind of stuff that, like, that lack of big moves, that lack of, like, landing the star-level talent via free agency or in their prime star-level talent, not Goldie, not Arenado, who are in their upper 30s at the time. Like, that's, I think, part of it as well. So it's a million different things that have led to us being in this place. But if I had to put, like, the one, all of that stuff on the lower end kind of plays into how they have not reached a World Series in the last decade.
Yeah, and I think if you're the Cardinals organization, you can get away with some of those smaller moves if you win. And that's where it hasn't worked out is, 100%. When he mentions, president of baseball operations feel like they've lied to us about payroll. I hate to tell you, ownership and president of baseball organizations have always lied to fans across baseball from the start of time when the sport started to get covered. The difference is it working or is it not? And for the Cardinals, who are kind of doing the little rope-a-dope with the fans, it's not working. And then it frustrates fans. If all this and all those little moves that we just talked about there, instead of signing the 1 and the 2, like this offseason, for example, if this team was in first place in the division, this isn't even a conversation today. Now, maybe we talk about the attendance, but it's more on the fact of, attendance is probably down just because of the lag from 2023. Now it's a conversation because, one, I don't think it's just a lag of 2023. It's a considerable trend that you've seen, and you're still not seeing winning baseball.
All right, let's hear from FedEx Brian on this issue as well.
Here's my problem that I have with the numbers that you have right there, Brandon, especially in the early 2000s. You got to remember also that Busch Stadium 2 was being cannibalized at that point. They were starting to remove it. So Busch Stadium 2 held a lot more people than what Busch Stadium 3 does. So you have that issue. Then you also have, as you also said, is that we had a general manager back then that we actually liked. You know, he went after players. We had a manager that wanted certain players, and that general manager went after them. We don't have that right now. We have a general manager that says, ho-hum, I'm just going to go to Aldi and I'm going to go shopping when I should be going to Whole Foods instead. And the Cardinal fan base is done with it. We are done. I am sorry. I have not attended a Cardinal game in 2 years.
I mean, the capacity of Busch 2 in 2003 was almost 50,000. It was bigger than Busch 3. So I don't think the capacity issue was what led to a lack of attendance that year. The other stuff that you say, like, fair. We were just talking about that. I think Mo has become, like, a legit... I don't know what level of... I don't know how high he is on the pecking order of reasons why fans have, like, been out on the Cardinals. But I think one of the main factors as to why Ollie Marmol is viewed the way that he is because he was a Mo pick. I do think that's real. I think, like, when he makes a signing, that signing is viewed as a Mo signing. When he makes a hiring, like Ollie Marmol, it is viewed as, oh, he's a Mo guy, right? And it's hard to remove that stain from the individual. Like, T-Bone, you mentioned, in Ollie Marmol's opening press conference, he talked about how anything less than a World Series is considered to be a disappointment for us. Anything less than that is not reaching the level that this organization should be striving for. It's exactly the kind of comment that this fan base has wanted to hear from somebody in power in that organization in a really long time, and they don't often do that. But it almost gets, like, pushed down because he's a Mo guy. And I heard Amzinger on with the morning show earlier today, and they asked him how people view the job that Ollie has done this year. And he said, well, most people just view him as a Mo puppet. They view him as a yes man for John Mozeliak. I don't think that's fair. Just from my conversations with Ollie, I don't think that's accurate, but it doesn't matter if it's accurate or not. When that is the view of a manager, people have a certain view on Mo, and it's going to be applied on you, fair or otherwise. So I think that the next big test for this organization is going to be when Mo steps down, who is the person that gets that job? How do they speak to the fans? And is it something that fans appreciate more? Is it something that they connect to more than the current front office structure? Because right now, and I've said it all along, like, I think Mo is better at his job than a lot of people do. I do think he has a tone problem. As somebody that has one, I can speak to that. And I think sometimes it does sound like he's talking down to fans, right or wrong. And I think that the lack of success that they've had over the last decade plays into fans souring on John Mozeliak as the primary voice that they hear from the organization. So when you put all of that into combination, I think that it is a factor, even if not the biggest one, for fans.
And the thing
not connecting with this team.
And I agree with everything you just said. The thing that I find interesting about that conversation is how Mo somehow, like, leapfrogged ownership. That's the one I don't fully understand, because every time we talk about payroll, it's not often have I heard anything about ownership today. it's been a factor of, oh, well, John Mozeliak, which to an extent, yes, is fair because he is the one that decides, instead of we've got $30 million to spend this offseason, instead of saying we're going to go get one of the top tier guys, it's going, we're going to go get two of the second tier guys. So that is fair. What I am a little surprised by is somehow that this train on John Mozeliak went from skipping ownership, who is the one that decides all the big decisions of like what is payroll, how much does it actually increase, to, okay, well, forget about them, it's John Mozeliak's fault. That's the one that I don't understand. I do agree with your sentiment of Ollie. I think it's unfair that he gets criticized as a Mo guy, but when you have the odd handling of the Mike Schilt firing,
100%.
It was always going to happen. It was always going to happen. It was always going to sour the fan base. And until Ollie Marmol won in October, which Mike Schilt technically did by 2019 getting to the NLCS, he's not going to be able to shed that.
All right, we want to hear more from you guys. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. We've done a lot of mic drops. Want to hear from the text line coming up in the next segment. We'll get to Believe It or Not at 1:30. So if you have any of those for us, get them in now. We'll do that coming up at 1:30. You're listening to BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. All right, we're wrapping up our conversation about the Cardinals' attendance. The Cardinals' attendance way low last night. One of the lowest attended games that they've had in the last 15 years. And when you look at it, if you're looking for just a night game, This was as low as they've had in a really long time. 31,401 was the announced attendance last night. That is not the actual number of people in the stadium. That is the number of tickets that were sold. That's what really matters to the Cardinals. They are now on pace for fewer than 3 million tickets sold for the first time in more than 20 years. That matters to the team. It's going to matter to their overall bottom line, and it's probably going to matter for their payroll next year, which is going to infuriate some Cardinals fans because it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy of, okay, the team wasn't great. It didn't inspire a lot of confidence, which everybody should have seen coming into the season, including ownership, which means that attendance is down, and that means that payroll's going to probably go down, which ends up impacting the team long term. So we wanted to hear from you guys. Why is it? What is the number one factor that's leading to a downturn in attendance once again? It's down at basically pre-2005 levels. From 2005 to 2019, Cardinals just had this unbelievable surge in attendance. And that's kind of what I've known for my entire life of following the Cardinals, right? I was 12 years old when they became that team that was just unbelievable in 2004. And then since then, in my entire adult life, that's just been what I've known. Cardinals fans go to the games, and it's going to be 35 to 40,000 fans out there every single night. It's not that way this year. It is a little bit different. So we want to hear from you, and this is going out to the text line for just a little bit. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. T-Bone, one person from the 314 says, guys, I love going to the games if the team is good or bad. The economy is ultimately my deciding factor on not attending. It's simply too expensive to take a family to the games. I think for some people that is a very real factor here. Some people want to, if they're going to go to the ballpark, have the full experience. And they don't really want to go because it's a good experience at home to just watch on Bally. If they're going to do like the bring your own food and walk from a distance, like that's not the full ballpark experience that a lot of people want to get. So I do understand that factor. This one comes next here from the 314. Guys, the Cardinals have actively put themselves in the middle by selling fans that, quote, you just need to get into the playoffs and anything can happen. And yet they haven't really sold championship competition in more than a decade. I think that's probably the biggest thing is if you're going to sell the idea of anything can happen in the playoffs, you better do some damage when you get there. Yeah. And I know it's a crapshoot. I know that that's a hard thing to be able to say because even the Dodgers, who are trying like hell every year to get in and get through, have only gone through one time, and it was in 2020. But they're consistently getting to the World Series at least, and certainly playing in the NLCS. And that's something this team can't claim.
And I think to that point as well, it's not a team that you really have to squint at to see how you do it.
No.
You know, like I've been talking about this from early on in this season. Like I just look at this roster, even today, now that the deadline has passed, I can look at this roster and go, I don't know how the hell they would go on a run in October. They might be able to get to October, and don't get me wrong, it would be fun to say, hey, playoff baseball is back in St. Louis, or we get to experience October baseball. The problem is that when I look at this team, watching them play on the field, I go, they're maybe getting 2 games, maybe 3 if they can win 1. When you get to October, it's not just doing damage. You've got to build the roster to where it can do damage, and you don't look at each October like the last handful of years and go, 2022. Man, they didn't really have that deep of a bullpen. 2021, they really didn't have starting pitching when they got there. And 2019 wasn't really a team that anybody thought was going to be able to go on a run. You've got to have a roster that is well constructed that can go do damage in October. And the Cardinals, and you've said this every offseason, is they always leave themselves at least one piece too short.
Yeah. From the 314, guys, after hearing what you said earlier, I will pivot from what I have said. It's not about going to see superstars. You're right. It is ultimately about winning. The bottom line is if this team wins, I will go back to the ballpark. I think that's the biggest thing. This one comes from a bar manager. They said, I was at the game on Tuesday night. They said the attendance was 32,000 or something around there. There had to be fewer than 20,000 actually in the stands, though. Goes back to the end of last season. I manage a bar. It hurts us, too. Patios was dead after the game. Kilroy's totally dead. Ballpark Village dead as well. It's a big deal for downtown for the Cardinals to be struggling like this. I think that's another factor here. Like, dude, we're not that far away from the Cardinals coming to fans for more money.
Yeah.
This was something that came out a little bit earlier this year. Now, we're probably a few years away from it, but if the team continues in this direction, right, and you don't see a significant change over the next few seasons, they're going to be coming to the fans for public financing to help what is probably necessary renovations at Busch Stadium in a time where they're not helping the economy around Busch Stadium as much as maybe they once did. Still helping, but not as much as they once did. and at a time where fans have a general distaste in their mouth about the way that the product is being run. And that could go even further in the other direction if the payroll goes down based upon the current attendance that they're looking at this year. So that's something worth keeping in mind as well. Next thing here, guys, speaking of that, it's a vicious cycle. The Cardinals rely on attendance for payroll. Attendance goes down, payroll goes down, so attendance once again goes down. Plus, they've got the Bally Sports situation that they've got to deal with. This is a complete mess, and I don't know how they get out of the cycle.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the cycle with attendance, like that one I could see where if, let's just say, for example, they didn't have the RSN issue, you're automatically getting guaranteed whatever is their contract. Every single season, you're automatically getting that dollar figure to come in. Well, then I think you can look at how you could see where the Cardinals would say, oh, well, okay, look, attendance is down. Look, it's easier for us. We'll take on a year or two of going a little bit past our revenues to try and end that cycle. But with the way that the RSN situation is set up, I think they will be fine, but they clearly seem really concerned about it, which is what makes it more fascinating to see what happens in the offseason, because it's unknown what the RSN situation is going to look like. You're in the midst of this cycle of attendance going down, and you're right, it does feel a little bit almost like an unbreakable cycle until maybe you have a team that surprises you and ends up doing damage in October.
Somebody on the text line said, guys, I love it. I've been to probably 10 to 15 games this year and have been able to get great tickets for cheaper than I've ever been able to pay previously. I do have one friend who is a diehard fan, though, and he refuses to go with me because he doesn't want to reaffirm anything for this team.
Hey,
totally fair.
Good for that guy. Somebody's taking advantage.
I will say, like, if you just like going to baseball games, if you just like going to see the Cardinals and you don't really care about, like, just sticking it to the man or anything like that, this is a great time to go. It looks like the weather is going to be great today from what I can tell, and tickets are super cheap. Like, if you go over to SeatGeek right now, you can get in for $7.
Yeah.
And by, like, the third inning, you'll probably be able to see where there's empty seats.
Yeah.
Just go down lower, man. Like, it's
might be able to move a whole level.
Don't tell any of the ushers, but, like, you'll probably be able to get to a pretty good area. I think pregame, they have, like, $5 Busch Lights up in the Budweiser Terrace area. So, yeah, like, get there like an hour before the game. Hang out at the Budweiser Terrace. It's standing room only out there. Hang out, see kind of where the empty seats are. You can have a good little time. All right, last thing here on the attendance. We've got one more mic drop that we want to hear from Nick on.
I think the biggest reasons why the attendance is so far down is you've got inflation's crazy. So everybody knows, and everybody else aside from Bill DeWitt and John Mozeliak have to do better at their jobs in order to keep their jobs. They have to consistently perform well and to the best of their ability in order to keep their jobs and get raises and things like that. Well, you know what they aren't doing? You know what Mozeliak and DeWitt aren't doing? They aren't putting their best effort in, and they're not building championship quality teams. And that's what we expect here in St. Louis. So, yeah, when we're sitting here figuring out what we're going to do with our disposable income, and the owner's out there saying that he can't spend more money, even though we're like the 24th ranked market in the United States, but we have the 3rd ranked attendance year after year after year. We've showed up and shown out for this ownership group, and now they're not doing the same for us. They're spending a ton of money on Ballpark Village and all that kind of stuff, but don't have to tell us how much they're making there and then expect us to accept the crap that they're putting out there. It's not just the spending. Mozeliak is absolute trash at his job. They can't develop talent. All of his trades are absolute failures aside from like Arenado and Goldie and Matt Holliday, which a 2-year-old could have pulled off. So, yeah, it's all about this ownership. It's all about the GM. If you're going to have a bad product, then this is what you're going to get. People aren't going to use it.
That's amazing. First of all, fantastic call. Appreciate the mic drop. It started off so like, all right, yeah, this is like pretty reasonable. I kind of understand where he's going at here. Like, I honestly kind of agree with a lot of what he said there about the DeWitts and like how I almost feel like sometimes they want you to be thankful for what they've done for the team. It's like, man, you made one of the best investments in the history of American sports. You got them at their absolute low point, and now you could cash in on them. And I know there's a difference. I don't need the text. There's a difference between liquid money that you can actually spend and what they have in assets. I get that. But that is now their money, essentially. It's like their investment has grown 100-fold from what it once was. And beyond that, they've been able to capitalize on the Ballpark Village area, and they're making money hand over fist with that. And they don't have to include any of that in the baseball-related revenues. Some people would say that they shouldn't. I personally believe that it is related to baseball because if you go down there when it's not baseball season, it doesn't have the same number of people as when there is a baseball game that's going on. I think the two are semi-related, but I digress. I think what he said there about the ownership, not being willing to invest and like supplement the team when it's necessary despite a lack of fan attendance, like if their revenues were truly down over the last 2 seasons, there are some teams across baseball, I don't even know if it's the majority, but some ownership groups that would say, I need to deficit spend right now. This is my time where I've got to be able to make up for it by going out there and spending more than what I probably want to because we've got to get back on track. And if it doesn't work in that first year, some of those teams would also then say, okay, time to reel it in, ladies and gentlemen. But you go out there and you really give that effort. And I don't know if the Cardinals are willing to do that. There's one other thing here from the text line, and we'll get to believe it or not on the other side. From the 314. Guys, I do think social media is a factor. There are far more alternatives to the stadium experience than there once were. I do wonder on this, and I don't think it's like up there with the winning or anything like that, but I think baseball has been hurt by social media maybe more than any other sport. And the reason why is because the season is just so long. So even the best teams will have 60 days where their team looks like crap, man. Like the best teams in the world, like Dodgers fans right now, are so frustrated with their team, man. That's a really good team, but they're frustrated because they have legitimate holes, and I'm not positive they're winning that division this year. And so when you have that and you're going through it in the moment and you're tweeting along with it or you're getting in these Facebook groups and commenting along or whatever, I do think there is something to the psyche of a fan for a baseball season where it gets long, it gets monotonous, and the downs feel worse than the highs feel good. Meanwhile, with like a football season, man, there's 16 Sundays. And if your team's out of it by December, whatever, you just check out and watch Red Zone the rest of the year. Or like during a basketball season, if your team sucks, you kind of know it before opening day. It's not necessarily that case all the time with
And there's
baseball.
other things going on.
Right.
You know, that's the problem with baseball.
Baseball's it.
Yeah, like
It's
if you're
the one thing going on in town.
If you're a White Sox fan, first off, sorry. But second, like, what have you done all summer? You know, if you're a diehard White Sox fan whose team was expected not to do anything this year, is going through one of the worst historical seasons we've ever seen, what do you do in the summer? You know, that's the other thing that really hurts baseball. And that's why, like, I think you're right. I do think the social media age has hurt that. I also think you're seeing more often now that teams just push for the middle, and people don't like the middle. You know, and I don't know if maybe that's always been the case, but it certainly feels more relevant now with the expanded postseason, and I think that's where you see a lot of that frustration come out on social media.
All right. Coming up next, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. We've let you guys vent a lot today. I've enjoyed it. I thought a lot of this has been a really good conversation. Appreciate genuinely all the fantastic mic drops and the texts as well. 314-399-9646. If you missed any of our conversation about the attendance throughout the course of the last hour and a half or so, check it out on the podcast page. 101ESPN.com, and the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
But coming up next, it's time for Believe It or Not here on 101 ESPN. Hey, it's BK. I got to tell you about my friends over at Circus Sports in Illinois. They are the best app to be betting on right now. If you have not downloaded the app just yet, now is the time to do so, because when you win over there, you're going to win more money. And ultimately, that's what sports betting is supposed to be all about, right? You're not just placing a bet to win a little bit. You're trying to win the most money possible. And over on FanDuel, on DraftKings, for example, they've got odds over there. They've got them available for you. But if you do a bunch of winning, they're going to limit you. And that is not going to happen with Circus Sports. They've got the the best customer service. They do not limit their bettors, and they're going to have the tight money line splits. And on their futures odds, in my opinion, they've got the best ones going right now. So if you wanted to place a bet, for example, right now on the Guardians to win the World Series, you could do so at 13-1. They typically have the best odds for some of the favorites. So like if you want to get Patrick Mahomes to win the MVP this year in the NFL, plus 550 over on Circa, 5-1 over on FanDuel. They recommend shop around, check out. They believe that you're going to get the best odds available to you with Circa Sports. So download the app today. It's Circa Sports in Illinois. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER or text ILGAMB to 833-234.
Grit Francis here with a SportsCenter update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Good night for the Cardinals last night. They picked up another win over the Rays. They win the series as Erick Fedde picked up his first win as a Cardinal. He went 5 innings, pitched only 4 hits against him and 1 earned run. Tonight, the Cardinals hope to build on that momentum and sweep the Rays as they will be back at Busch Stadium for a first pitch at 6:15. It'll be Kyle Gibson tonight going up against Shane Baz for the Rays. I'm Grit Francis. The SportsCenter update's been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Finally, something the fans really enjoy, believe it or not. Something the Wits wouldn't do, am I right?
No chance.
Believe it or not, I'm walking on air. I never thought I could feel so free.
Flying away on a wing and a prayer.
Who could it be?
Believe it or not, It's just me.
Wow, we got a cameo there
yeah, and
from
you know
one
what?
Grant Francis.
I got to tell you what, Grant. I'm now more upset that you didn't participate in last week's song because that was solid.
399.
Listen, I had to.
9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show for Believe It or Not here on 101 ESPN. All right, boys, let's start out with this one. Guys, believe it or not, I mentioned this in the last segment, the LA Dodgers will fail to win the National League West. One of the Diamondbacks or the Padres will end up winning the NL West this season.
Oh, man, I'm going to actually believe this, and I can't believe I'm at this spot because to tell you how much I had just kind of written off that the Dodgers had won the West, when I was watching that game last night versus the Phillies and Joe Davis was like, and the Dodgers could be within just 3 games up on the Padres. I was like, what?
Yeah.
So
they've lost like 3 games since the All-Star break.
They've been playing well. Both the Padres and the Diamondbacks, and Eduardo Rodriguez made his first start last night, and he was okay. I'll believe this. I don't think they're going to win the West. I think it's going to be the San Diego Padres, which, honestly, chef's kiss that Mike Schilt's going to win the NL West.
Of course. Good for him, man.
Your favorite.
My gut still
I've always
says...
said he's a good manager.
My gut still says that the Dodgers are going to win that division. There's too much talent on that
coming back
team.
is going to be a big deal.
I still think they're going to pull it out. I don't know how much success they're going to have in the playoffs, but I still think they're going to pull out a division win.
I will say I heard something on a podcast yesterday, and honestly, it was the best description I've ever heard about the way the Dodgers operate some of their pitching. It was every year the Dodgers build a bullpen that has a bunch of guys that are always injured, and they never learn because it always backfires. And guess what's happening right now? Their bullpen is slowly falling apart along with their rotation. Yes.
It's so weird, man. It's like the Dombrowski Tigers. Like when he was in charge of the Tigers, it's funny. Now he's all in on the bullpen. I think there's a lesson to be learned from the Tigers.
Yeah.
The Tigers, every year, you'd go into the season and be like, man, stacked lineup. Look at that rotation. Can they find like 3 arms that will get them through the 7th to the 9th inning once you get to the playoffs? And the answer every single year was no, they will not. For whatever reason, it just never worked for them in the postseason with their bullpen. And the Dodgers, same thing, dude. Like their pitching falls apart. They build around hurt pitchers, whether that's starters or relievers. It's both of them. And by the end of the year, they're breaking down again, dude. I do think they're going to end up winning this division. I think they'll have enough with their offense to be able to slug them into the postseason as the National League West winner. But I think it's going to be really tight down the stretch. And I think it's going to require like heroics from Shohei Ohtani and Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman. Freeman being out for a few days, that was also not great for them. Mookie's going to be a massive boost to that offense, and I think that's ultimately going to be what catapults them into the National League West division winner. But it's going to be close.
Guys, believe it or not, and BK got me kind of turned on to this one when we talked about Ali Marmol being a Mo-picked puppet, as he's referred to as fan base. Believe it or not, Chaim Bloom will get the same reputation since he was brought into the organization by John Mozeliak.
I think what might end up happening is people change their frustrations from Mo and just apply it now to Bill DeWitt. I think that could be what happens is they say, oh, wait, it wasn't Mo. It's the ownership group that's the problem. So I think that's probably what you would end up happening. So I guess I'm kind of believing it because I think it transfers the blame, but maybe not totally to Chaim Bloom.
I think I'm going to believe it. I think it will be all of the above sort of thing. Like the blame will fall on everybody. It's just like sort of the manager conversation when it comes to like, oh, he's just a yes man. He's just a puppet. Like that's going to be the conversation with Chaim Bloom.
I'm going to believe it because I don't know if I think at a certain point you will see eventually what you said, BK, that blame shift more towards ownership. I think what will happen, though, is people, unless Chaim Bloom wins right away, will immediately go, well, what'd you expect? This was a Mo hire. This guy was hired by John Mozeliak. Of course it's not going to work. I think until you get someone that actually comes from outside the organization that is, not has any tie to the Cardinals, like Chaim Bloom, for example, is going to have at least 1 or 2 years within the organization before potentially taking over. I think until you see someone externally just come in, fresh start, then will that blame shift up to ownership.
All right, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. We'll get to some of those texts here in just a moment. Grant, what do you got for us today?
Yeah, looking at the series ahead after the Rays, believe it or not, the Royals will sweep the Cardinals this weekend, and the Cardinals will go 0-4 against Kansas City this season. Tanner, we're going to start with you because BK can sit this one out. I don't feel like he
I was actually going to say not. I'm not going to
Really?
this. I think the Cardinals will win one of those two.
You're just trying to
He's
BKO
also-
the Cardinals, aren't you?
Well, and he's still high on the Cardinals. I will say, believe it. I think the Royals are by far a better team. I think they will probably sweep that little 2-game set.
Got Mike Trout 2.0 playing shortstop for him, so that's good.
That guy's unbelievable.
Sure is.
I will say believe it. I think the Royals will end up being 4-0 against the Cardinals this season.
He's putting together one of the best seasons by a shortstop in Major League history. I heard Greg Amsinger earlier today. It was one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard said on the airways, and I like Greg Amsinger. I think he does an amazing job. But they asked him which shortstop he would start a team with if he was starting a team today. He said Ellie De La Cruz, and I almost, my jaw hit the floor.
Wait, he even skipped over Gunnar Henderson? I thought that's who you were going to say.
I was like, I don't understand how you can possibly say Ellie De La Cruz over Bobby Witt Jr. right now. Like, there's no explanation. He was like, well, the upside with Ellie De La Cruz, the upside, like, hitting 30 home runs, batting .350 in a season, having an OPS over 1,000 with Gold Glove defense at shortstop, like that kind of upside, because that's literally what Bobby Witt Jr. is doing this year. It's nuts. But anyways, yeah, I don't think that they're going to sweep the Cardinals.
Follow-up question on that. Do the Royals have, because I'm not super familiar with the Royals, to be honest.
Me either. T-Bone will answer this.
Do they have a ton outside of Bobby Witt?
No.
No. Not offensively.
3 good position players.
Yeah.
So here's where I'm going with that. Like, you saw Ellie De La Cruz with the Reds. How much did he lift that team up? I mean, it hasn't been substantial. Meanwhile, look at what the Royals are doing this season.
Dude, Bobby Witt Jr., there's a real argument that he's the MVP of the American League.
Yeah.
Like, over Aaron Judge, who's having a historically great season. Bobby Witt, you can make a real case right now, is the AL MVP. Their second best hitter on the team is Salvador Perez. His OPS is 812. Third best hitter is Vinny Pasquantino. His OPS is 785. After that, it's Michael Massey, who's at 750.
Yeah, pretty big drop off.
They basically have one amazing hitter, and then 2 guys that are pretty good. 2 guys that are in like the Alec Burleson range of like really nice complementary bats in that middle of the order conversation. But yeah, it's essentially a 3-man offense.
And the thing that makes them dangerous, because I think you can get away in the playoffs with like 3 legit bats, and you just name those 3 guys. Yep. You can probably get away with that. What makes the Royals dangerous is they've got a rotation that can pitch. They got Reagan's is a stud. You've got
Seth Lugo's
been awesome. Michael Walker's been a solid like number 3 starter that you feel pretty good about starting in like a game 3 or 4 in the
Singer's
playoffs.
Been really good for them this year.
Singer's had to bounce back. You're like, they're dangerous because they're pitching, not so much their offense.
And they hired somebody from the Rays to modernize their pitching approach. Interesting. All right, from the 314, guys, believe it or not, Caleb Williams will end up having a worse career than Trevor Lawrence and will never sign a big deal after his rookie contract. I'm not believing that. I think Caleb Williams is going to be good.
I'm not going to believe it either. I think he'll be better than Lawrence, and I think he'll get that contract. I'm not completely sold that he'll like ever be like a top 5 quarterback, top 7 maybe, but I think he'll end up being better than Trevor Lawrence.
I know Grant hates him.
I don't hate Caleb Williams.
Yes, you do. It's okay. You can admit it.
I'm torn on this, though, because I'm not super high on Trevor Lawrence either. So, like, am I going to put one over the other?
Low bar. Also, the best quarterback in Bears history, like in terms of the statistical stuff, is like 4,000 yards and 25 touchdowns. So he's going to get a new contract.
Is that like Jay Cutler? Is that who that is? Or Kyle Orton?
Basically, Jay Cutler, yeah.
Jay Cutler is their all-time leading passer, by the way.
It's amazing. All right, from the 314, believe it or not, Beltran will be the next Chicago White Sox manager. We'll get to 2 more of these real quick.
I'm not going to believe it. If I'm Carlos Beltran, I know that he's wanting to get back into the game. I think somebody that's a better run organization will take a chance on him. I think Yankees would do it if or when they move on from Aaron Boone. Dodgers would be a team that would be willing to take that chance. I think there's better opportunities for him, so not.
Yeah, I'm not going to believe it either, especially as a first-time manager. I would not touch that team with a 10-foot pole.
No chance. No chance would I be taking that job if I'm Carlos Beltran. All right, last one here. Believe it or not, Mason Wynn will win an MVP before his career is done. I'm going to say not, and this is not a shot against Mason Wynn. It's really hard to do. I think Mason Wynn will be a multi-time All-Star. I do not think he's going to win an MVP.
Yeah,
but I hope I'm wrong.
I'm with you. I don't know if he's going to have the ceiling for an MVP. All-Stars, I could see that for sure. I don't think MVP, so not believe it.
I agree with you guys. Do you think Jordan Walker could have the ceiling to do that?
Yes. That's why you keep him. Because he still has that kind of potential.
Yeah.
I think it's less likely today than it was 6 months ago, but it's still possible.
By the way, how long till we start the JJ Weatherholt holy crap, he's hitting the ball really hard thing? Because holy cow, he is smoking the ball down in Palm Beach.
He should probably be in at least high A and potentially double A sooner rather than later.
In a Mo cut that says we can't really move on from this prospect because we're seeing numbers compared to Albert Pujols. That is the chef's kiss for the end of him.
All right, in the next segment, we're going to give away a pair of tickets to see Green Day with special guest Rancid. But right now, I got to tell you about the second annual Blues and Brews Friday evening, September the 20th. It's going to be at the Anheuser-Busch Brewery. It's an awesome event. Last year we went, it was fantastic. Features live music, plus appearances by blues players, alumni, food trucks, 101 ESPN giveaways, and so much more. Tickets on sale right now at 101ESPN.com. Just $20. We'll see you guys out there, and we'll see you next in the Rewind here on 101 ESPN. With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Brandon Kiley. If you missed anything from today's show, be sure to check it out on the podcast page. 101ESPN.com. Free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
And if you're watching us right now on YouTube, youtube.com/101ESPN-STL, this is your chance to win a pair of tickets to see Green Day with special guest Rancid next Thursday, August the 15th at Hollywood Casino Amphitheater. If you are watching YouTube right now, you see that I am wearing a prop. If you can name that prop, and send it into the Air Comfort Service text line. Your texter number 11. Texter number 11 at 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. If you can name the prop that I'm wearing currently, and your texter number 11, you're getting that pair of tickets to see Green Day on August 15th. All right, to finish out the show today, T-Bone, Cardinals going up against Shane Baz later on this evening, and the Tampa Bay Rays trying to pull off the series sweep against them. Some significant splits here. Lefties much better against Shane Baz on the season than righties. It is a small sample size either direction. Do you think that we will see Paul Goldschmidt back in the lineup tonight against Shane Baz?
I think we will. I do like the idea of them going more of a platoon advantage with him. That way they have a right-handed bat off the bench for late in games against lefties. But I just don't think they're going to do this at this point with Paul Goldschmidt. And that's why, on that point, is why I'm not bringing him back next year. He could have a role on this team next year. I'd be in, take a little bit of that pay cut, be a guy that's a platoon bat that can play first. I'm in. Problem is, I don't think the Cardinals will do that.
I don't either. I think he'll be in the lineup today, and I think it's the wrong choice, unfortunately, in my opinion. You guys think they win tonight? Think they pull off the sweep? Kyle Gibson on the mound going up against Shane Baz?
No.
I'll say they do it just because they frustrate the hell out of me, and they'll find a way to do it.
I think they lose tonight. I think they get back on track tomorrow, and that ultimately is how they get the split against the Kansas City Royals. For Tanner and Grant, I'm BK. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow at 11 a.m. Fastlands has you guys taken care of from 2 to 6 right here on 101 ESPN.